We're back, folks, and for LNG Gold members, that has a very different meaning because you saw me about 25 minutes ago celebrating a triumphant WCW Big Bang in 2001 with a confirmed shooting myself. But that is not our focus this evening. Our focus is an edition of Grin Grappler that I've been very excited about. One that just feels like you kind of assumed we'd always end up here, right? Kind of like on Anderson in that way. Like, we're going to end up doing this one. An all-time favorite of mine, Ravishing Rick Rude, in our sights. An exciting program ahead. We hope you're well on this wonderful Tuesday night. Expert panel, as always, a familiar four-man faction. One of the great four-man factions, in my view. Lord Oracle, back in business. How are you tonight, brother?
I'm good. I have enjoyed these bouts tremendously. I watched them last night. Believe it or not, about 3 of these matches I'd never seen before.
Wow.
And I was pleasantly surprised at the outcome. We've been doing this for what, 3 years almost now? Maybe 3 years in March, maybe.
Oh my God, is that true? Yeah, that's true. Oh,
and,
Jesus.
It's about time we put the Ravishing one on the pedestal.
I think so.
And talked about someone who really had like a 10-year career from '84 Memphis when he first got all the way up until his big back injury in '94. Of course, he came back and had a big run as a manager in '97, '98. But yeah, this is I think we've covered a really good 3 years in '86, '89, '92 of his career.
Mm-hmm.
And I, believe it or not, never realized that he was one of your favorites. Like I knew you liked him, but I didn't know he was like a someone you would see in Joe Holbert Promotions.
Yeah, very much so. Well, I'm a man of many different. I can mix it up, Oracle, as you know. But there is a story I have to tell in that regard, but I'll get to it in a moment. Firstly, Bobby Two Shoes. I feel like I'm singing so long, bro. You're looking fresh face. You're looking great. You're looking ravishing, dare I say. How are you, Bobby?
Thanks, man. Yeah, I was thinking that too. I was in Chicago for a couple of weeks, didn't do shows. I'm like, I haven't been out here in a while, but it's only been a couple of weeks. I just do so many shows these days that, you start missing them, and it adds up. But yeah, it's nice to be back. Fired up for this one. Enjoyed all these matches. Looking forward to getting into it.
Dare I say we haven't seen Bobby since another Chicago man reappeared on television recently.
Makes you think.
Makes
you think. But enough
Uncle
about
Man is back.
Oh my God, we did the same. Oh, good God, man. Oh dear, what a messy double down. Contrarian Alex, how are you this evening, brother?
I'm doing well, as always. Excited to be back with the boys here to talk real graps. And it's a nice reprieve because, classic fashion, I procrastinated everything the last minute, and I got to spend tomorrow getting the house ready and everything prepared for Thanksgiving. And so this will be a nice few hours to not be stressed and overthinking things. And here to talk about visually one of the more memorable wrestlers, and especially if you are my age bracket, if you're a Hasbro kid, he was a must-have and someone you're very familiar with, and someone you probably imitated quite a few times in front of the mirror, in front of your parents, doing the wrestling in the living room. And I am excited to talk about his physical representations via action figure and also his digital ones. I learned a lot in doing research for this today in terms of like figures I didn't know existed, and also he has a hilarious run of video games he appeared in.
That sounds incredible, because even in recent years, that topic has interested me, because my understanding is he's always been a guy that's been under a Legends deal, but he has like come and gone within even the recent video games, which has been interesting. So looking forward to that. As Oracle mentioned, Ravishing Rick Rude, one of my all-time favorites. We're going to talk about all of our individual fans here in a moment. But firstly, Bob, I feel like we're forgetting something. Is there something folks could do to support us to that like button? What do you think?
Yeah, you want to go ahead and smash that like button.
Yeah. Do you know how much we've been struggling without you with that dude? Like, Brainbuster's in charge of countdowns now, and he counts, he mixes it all up. He goes, 3 before 4. It's this whole thing.
I got to be back around here more.
You do, man. You're the enforcer. You know, he's the new enforcer. He's CW to your arm. Anyway, also a WCW Big Boom reference. But anyway, let's talk Rick Rude. Bob, I'll actually start with you, considering how emphatically you told people to hit the like button. Your Rick Rude fandom, you know, how deep that is, it may not be very much, but I'm just intrigued, like your experience with Rick Rude. Take us away, Bobby, go for it.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, I was thinking about this. Like, he was in Showdown Legends of Wrestling. It's the only one of those 3 games he was in, so I definitely saw him there. And then, you know, the appearing on Raw and Nitro on the same night thing definitely got some play by, like, 2005, 2006, when it was like, oh, that's a funny thing that happened.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, as far as matches, like, yeah, I mean, not really till the network came along. You know, he was a guy that, like, he was around and talked about well in, you know, WWE's history and canon and all that, but never, like, you know, talked about, like, a top guy. And so, yeah, it's kind of been a lot of filling in the blanks on my own, like it is with a lot of these guys, where, especially the guys where, like, a lot of their good run was in WCW, where, like, you know, just got to kind of catch up, fill in the gaps.
Yeah, he's very interesting now. We've covered some grapplers who are like, you know, crystal pieces of like WWE lore. And then we've covered other grapplers who have been erased almost. And then Rude, I think, is like right in the middle to Bob's point, where he's like absolutely part of the history they tell, but they tell it at a certain level that I think doesn't capture why he's such an iconic character. Because I mean, iconic, I think we're going to use that word a little bit, you know, pretty often tonight, because this does not feel like a reach at all to be talking about Rick Rude in 2024, which is kind of crazy considering that we are 30 years removed from him as an actual active wrestler. That says a lot. So that'll be an interesting kind of theme throughout. The Oracle of Wrestling, your Rick Rude fandom. Go for it.
Yes, I mean, Rude was just a guy who was basically from the WWE Classic era when I was a kid, when I was little. That's kind of how I recognized him. And I didn't really get to explore his strengths and sort of his career and whatnot until, as I bring it up many, many times on this program, the WCW Smarks Choice Bowl and the old Smarks Choice Wrestlers Board back in 2009, where we watched a lot of old WCW. And, you know, his 1992 was constantly talked about, and some matches were sort of rediscovered and talked about, including the Dustin Rhodes match in the Nintendo Challenge Series final, which before 2009, I don't think was. I'm sure, you know, it was known of, but it was not a match that was that was one of those matches that was kind of you know, had a big spotlight put on it at the time, and has hit the YouTubes and whatnot over the years. Just a tremendous wrestler. 92 legitimately, and we'll cover it in great detail here. One of the all-time great years for somebody stateside in a major wrestling company. The gimmick was always over and always great, but watching these matches, it goes to show how quite incredible he actually was in the ring as a performer. Somebody so good that I think if he had stayed healthy, and even though he was great in the WWF, because it was such a gimmick-oriented company, his bumping and stuff, which was terrific, he was never really able to kind of show all that he had until 91 when he came to WCW. And I honestly think if he had been able to stay healthy and worked in other places beside the Fed from like 87 to 90, I think he would have stood out even more as like an in-ring like lunatic. Because I mean, he was legitimately that good. I mean, just in this small sample size, he was a pretty gifted in-ring talent.
Yes, very much so. There is an element of what if due to the injury. I think we discussed this at the end of last month's show.
Mm.
I think people, when they think of that injury, they think of the actual final match. But as we've discussed before, his injury issues become before that, right? Which is why we always highlight 92, because there's a shift after that, which we'll get into later in the show. Alex, I'm intrigued. Your Rick Rude fandom, brother. Take it away.
Yeah, as I mentioned, if you were in my age bracket and you were a Hasbro kid, it's one of the first ones I remember playing with. I remember Jake Roberts, which I still have my original Jake Roberts and the Damien snake figure accessory that comes with it. So if I'm ever killed and, someone takes out a life insurance policy on that accessory, just find out where Joe Holbert was on that day. But the Hasbro of Rick Rude was a twofer because he had an arm that was like this. So you could hook in a Rude Awakening and drop a guy, or you could lower it down because his action was pulled back and punch. So you could do the headlock with the punch on the guy. So he was a top heel in my Fig Fed as a kid. But he's one of my dad's favorites in the sense of, I don't remember this, but he said, like, when I would play with my wrestling figures or when I would like wrestle with my wrestling buddies, whenever I did like my promos, I would always start him with what I'd like to have right now. And so that's, and what wrestling fan worth their weight in, hot dogs and handshakes hasn't once or twice done the Rick Rude hip swivel to some, for some sort of reaction to a nearby crowd or friend. But yeah, I remember there's such a difference in my mind and my memory between Perm Rick Rude in the WWF and the ass kicker Rick Rude in WCW. I remember when I saw him in WCW as a kid, I was like, man, he looks way more intimidating now. And, he always kind of wrestled like a bit of a badass, but as we'll talk about, that look he brought to WCW while still doing like the womanizer thing, he looked like a real hard ass, like a scary son of a bitch. And then, of course, I would have been 10, 11 or something in 97. And he has a hilarious 97. He has storylines in ECW, the WWF, and WCW, and never really gets physical. I think there's that one kind of infamous case where maybe the Hart Foundation gets into a like scuffle with DX and someone tries to like attack him and he's like, get the fuck away from me. If my insurance agent sees this, you're going to blow the whole deal, man.
This is Lloyd's of London here.
And as to not put a damper on the end of the episode, go ahead and talk about this now. There's always been the quizzical thing about Rick Rude also, or kind of just like morbid piece of trivia that it's sadly one of the things I always think about when I think about Rick Rude. He died the same day as Columbine. And back in those days, we're such a great country and have evolved since then. I remember that was like a very horrific event of my childhood. So when I heard like later that day or later that week that Rick Rude died, it didn't seem as big, in comparison. So that's like the stream of consciousness of what I remember about Rick Rude. But as far as matches go, I have memories of him wrestling Jake Roberts, and as far as like vivid memories go, the stuff in WCW stuck out more, like Sting and the Dustin match we'll talk about here, and because he was in WCW at the same time Bulldog had that short run, right? Did they cross paths? Yeah,
they have a very funny brawl where Rick does his like tough guy gimmick and kind of beats him up. It's interesting, very interesting.
So in the time since, I've really gone back to this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, like colorful wrestlers. That's the type of shit I live for. So he's one of those guys that like all the different ring gear and stuff he had. He never was visually boring. I'll say that about him. There'll be some kind of funny road stops as far as boring matches he had that I'm sure we'll discuss. But and then the last piece about him that sticks with me always is, and I can never really find an answer to this, his theme song in the WWF was written and performed by Jim Johnston, but on old like re-airings and whatnot, it's dubbed over with some like generic version of it. And I think there's only like 2 or 3 Jim Johnston songs they do that with, but I've always been curious what the deal with that is, because his original theme song is a fucking banger with Johnston just wailing on the sax and like the snare drum. It's fantastic.
It's so much better than that horrible dub they use. It drives me nuts every time. That's brutal.
That shit.
Yeah. But yeah, because like the fucking his real one starts with a snare drum like it's the military, but then it goes into the sax.
Great.
It makes you want to swivel your hips. I'm not gonna lie.
Tremendous. All right. So, as Oracle mentioned, and I think I led with it, Rick Rude, one of my all-time favorites, but I have a very similar outline. I think much of the audience, that if you're in a similar boat and you're a fan of Rick Rude, there'll be some overlap here. You know, Rick Rude, the way that he is kind of captured in WWF history, as we discussed a moment ago, he is a part of that, and they do talk about him. It is with the perm, right? It's Intercontinental Champion, Ultimate Warrior, rival, Heenan family, the big hair, you know. And so I knew of that Rick Rude, and I'd seen Rick Rude matches, and thought, obviously, like, he's a memorable character. You're not going to confuse him for anyone else. I mean, it stands out. But I will never forget just, like, trying to work through WCW when the network emerged, watching my brother a lot. Because the thing with WCW, within that WWE history, that canon, WCW, like, doesn't exist between, like, Turner buying the company and Hogan jumping in their canon, right? Like, it's just like this lost time, which is hilarious because now that's like my favorite stuff. And Rick Rude is a big part of that. And I just will never forget when we saw Rick Rude with the short hair, and he's a little bit bigger too. Granted, the roster's a little bit smaller around him, but the reality is it's the look that he had for the Warrior Cage match, but I wasn't aware of that at the time. He physically is so striking for that run, as Alex mentioned. And I remember being blown away. And then a match that completely changed my fandom is he and Ricky Steamboat in the Iron Man match, which we did not do because I've talked about it so much. We've done a grin along for it. It's like, that match is one of the most important matches in my entire fandom because I was so enthralled by it, but it wasn't something that was discussed on, like, it was discussed online, but the place where I stumbled upon the real conversation about it was the Pro Wrestling Only match thread that I stumbled upon, which then led me down a whole can of worms and a whole, you know, a path that I'm still stumbling my way through. But I often wonder, like, you know, that's the one match that inspired me to, like, look up reviews and stuff and conversation about a single match. So in that way, it's a significant one for me. It's still one of my all-time favorite matches, and it also kind of highlighted and captured something that I would begin to become very, very aware of, which, as Oracle mentioned, 1992 was not only Rick Rude's peak, but like a classic American wrestler year in terms of his campaign that year, which ends on a sour note because of the way he ends that year, unfortunately. But that's where it kind of comes together for me. There's a bunch of lore about Rick Rude that, like, fascinates me. He's a guy who there's, like, a mythology around in terms of he's, like, being a badass and all these stories, and all the boys have different encounters with him. He famously had, like, an issue with both Hogan and Flair. And, like, wrestling is such a political industry and everyone is playing the game. The level, like, how few shits that dude must have given to be in that position, like, willingly have a beef for those two dudes is unhinged. Fascinating character. And again, you know, I looked at this earlier. I think Rick is the closest we've come to Alexa in terms of how short the span is. So I think, hold up, wait.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, calm down, please. I think, what was our first Alexa match? 2016 or 17?
16, I believe.
Sparkle.
If it was 16, it would be the same. Because the reason I bring this up is, Oracle mentioned we only covered 3 years. But our span from front to back is literally like 6 years. Which is really, it has to be one of the short ones we've ever done, dude. I'm pretty sure it's him and Alexa are the shortest in that regard. And I bring this up to say, it is insane that we announced this show and people are so excited about it. And people are like, oh my God, you know, Rick Rude, they still remember him fondly. They have all these memories and these snapshots, these moments. It's a short run, dude. I mean, really, I just found that to be fascinating. We start in May 86 and we end in August 92. Like,
yeah,
there are brothers in developmental that long nowadays, dude. Like,
longer.
You know, and it's like, I know that the way I phrased that was hilarious, but, you know, Alexa's obviously is current, so she's still around. We talk about Rick Rude, and everyone speaks so fondly of him and has these memories. It's such a just short window of time. I think it says so much about his career. So I guess let's dive into it here.
Was he in the military? Was he?
I did not get that from my brief research, but I will.
Well, yeah, I couldn't find that either. For some reason, I thought he was, and he had that tattoo of an anchor, which I was trying to figure out the significance of.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
but he was from. Did Vern train him? Because he was from the. What?
He
was from the same like area, right, where all those fuckers came from. Yeah.
I've got you covered, Alex. I'm going to get to it. Don't
worry,
brother. Because that is a really interesting like piece of wrestling history. That group of guys that all merged at once, and then that scene.
It's like that, and the story of West Texas State, where like fucking 3 NWA world champions came from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is another fascinating one. So just quickly, the Axe, Oracle said it, 86, 89 and 92. Obviously, that's not what we were going for. It's just it worked that way, right? It was the most natural way to do it. The Axe broadly are pre-WWF, WWF, and then really WCW because he's representing them in New Japan. So I think doing a match from Japan was a great way to kind of shine a light on his versatility, but we'll get there, obviously. So as Alex said, he's part of that Minnesota crew. Robbinsdale High School, Nikita Koloff, Kurt Hennig, John Nord, Barry Darso, him and Kurt, of course, would be kind of connected. I think a lot of people, if they're talking about one of those guys, they're only like a moment away from bringing up the other, right? They're kind of like tied to one another. It's like these classic WWF, Intercontinental Champion, that type of guy. Rhodes, the most kind of significant part of his background was that he was this like legendary arm wrestler, right? That was the thing about Rhodes that they still talk about, and like allegedly there are these stories of him going at the bars and daring guys to arm wrestle him and taking their money, and it being a whole, a whole situation. He was also a bouncer with, I think the Road Warriors were alongside him in that regard, and Jesus. He was like they would talk about him being like the fearsome one of them, or he was the one that you really didn't want to mess with, which is hilarious considering the wrestling gimmicks and such. Eddie Sharkey is who trained Ravishing Recruit, who also trained the Road Warriors, as we just discussed. He debuted in 1982. So again, even if we extend the time span to like beyond what we're covering, it's not a long career, right? In the grand scheme of things.
The Miz has been in the WWF longer than Rick Rude's entire career.
Dude, I'll use a like more quirky one just because this stood out to me recently. Finn Balor debuted in WWE 10 years ago, over 10 years ago, because we just covered it on Full Sail Behind. Like, and again, that's Finn has all the stuff before that, right? But like, and he's not done yet either. The way he's wrestling, he'll be wrestling until he's 60. So it's fascinating. He debuted in 82. He's a job guy for Mid-Atlantic, Georgia Continental. He is like an infamous green guy when he breaks in terms of like there are many stories about how long it took him to click as a pro. Cornette tells a story about Dennis Condrey where they came in. I'm not sure which territory they were stopping through, and Rude was one of the local enhancement guys they worked with, and Condrey called a spot, and Rude said, "I didn't get it," and he called it again and again, and he called it 4 times, and eventually Condrey said, "Just tag out." And he was so out of his depth. That was like 84, maybe 83. So that gives you an idea of like, where he started. Everyone has to start somewhere, right? But in 84, he heads to Memphis, which is where he becomes Ravishing. Well, I mean, I guess he was Ravishing before that, but that was when the name arrived at least. And he would work with Jerry Lawler's son, which I'm sure was a huge part of his development. At the end of that year, he winds up in Florida with Percy Pringle, and they would jump to World Class together in 85, where he would get a considerable push, which brings us to our first match, Act 1, May 4th, 1986, Bruiser Brody, Ravishing Rick Rude, Texas Stadium, 20-plus thousand in attendance.
Pretty good house for 86 World Class.
Yeah, I think that's for 24,000. It was the number I saw online. So, maybe you take a wrestling boost off that and you maybe get to 20, right? I mean, it's a good house. The third Von Erich Memorial Parade of Champions. This is for Rude's World Class World Heavyweight title, which he had won when it was still the NWA American Heavyweight Championship. I was wondering about that part of it because that part always confused me. So here we are, Brody, Rude. Alex, we're in Texas, brother. Take it away.
We are. We're there for the boys. Was our first Bruiser match?
He wasn't on the Alexa Bliss episode. I know that.
That's for sure. There's no. There's only fan cam of that. There's nothing produced. Fucking Percy Pringle. The first time I discovered that Paul Bear was something before Paul Bear, he's so fucking funny. And of course, Bill Mercer. Percy Pringle III here in all his sartorial splendor. One thing I took note of here is like I'm not going to fixate on Rick Rude's physique for the entirety of this, but we go through some changes with it. Yeah. He's young here. His waist is like the size of a cereal bowl. Like his body does like this weird, like he's a very like he's cut as shit, but you know, we see him by the end of this, he's in this brick shithouse mode. So that was like, Jesus, man, he was thin. And man, I'll give him credit. He'd been in the business a few years, but either Brody liked him and told him to, or he knew Brody's reputation beforehand. Because in this opening like stanza, Rick Rude is bringing the heat to Bruiser Brody, man. He's throwing like these renegade chops and these big fucking overhand clubs to the back. And Brody does hit him with a boot that kind of rattles him a bit. That's pretty fantastic. There's a part where he gets knocked down. I just have written down here, and you hear Percy go, Rick, for God's sakes, get up, Rick.
I love him so much, dude. What a great manager.
I was, commenting just a second ago, but Bruiser must have liked him because he went up for a hip toss. They do this hilarious exchange where Bruiser Brody does a leapfrog and Rude ducks under him. There's this dude, the stories of Bruiser are usually a bit more like intentionally brutal. The way he shit cans Rude just throws him out like a bag of shit, and Rude's leg hits the top rope, so he just falls right on his shoulder on the outside. Big pop for that. We get a Bruiser Brody drop kick. Bruiser Brody like accidentally invents the jackhammer in this match. He picks up Rick Rude and gives him a jackhammer, and Bill Mercer says something to the effect of and a bit of a unique twist on the end of that suplex there, that suplex. And Percy takes a really good bump, which of course would not be the last. And then my last note is disqualification. Well, yes, it's a Bruiser Brody match, so I don't know what else you expect, but crowd is fucking hot for this. In our Von Erich episode we did last year, we talked obviously about the very feverish and just enthusiastic, passionate fans that World Class had during its peak. And this is not the peak of World Class, but there's still those people there are still like, they're really into Bruiser Brody and they want to see Rick Rude get his ass kicked. Even so, and at the end, where Bruiser heads up the aisleway and, they pick the fight back up, which during that too, they're just throwing fucking taters at each other back and forth. It's excellent. A fun match here, a really cool place to start. Bruiser Brody's one of those guys of like, what more can we say that hasn't been said about him? So it's not like I watched this and was like, oh man, look at how great this guy was. But for Rick Rude only starting 4 years prior to this, for him to hold his own in this capacity it speaks to like how quick he got it and how like in command he was of his himself in the ring and like his presence and whatnot. A fun start.
Yeah, you suggested this when we were looking for some pre-WF stuff, and it immediately made sense to me because it is like, it made sense because it's a big match for him, a very early point in his career. What I was not ready for, because I hadn't seen it in a while, was it actually becomes more notable for our project of like, you mentioned it, the toughness he operates with here. And you kind of see like early the things that would make him really special in Act 3. And I think there's definitely truth to what you said of maybe Brody was fond of him, or at least Brody was told to be kind of, giving to him, by someone he actually listened to, God forbid. But there also, I think, is an element of Rude just like, making the most of the space given to him and bringing it and being believable, being physical, being rough and tough. So that becomes a little bit of the highlight here, I think. Bobby, what did you make of our first match?
Yeah, I'm with Alex, man. Like, this is a hell of a time. The crowd's there for it. Percy Pringle as well. I don't know how much I've seen of him as not Paul Bearer, but yeah, it's a revelation. He's awesome. I don't like the finish where it's disqualification, throw the guy over the ropes, but they make up for it with the brawl at the end. And yeah, a really fun starting point. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm kind of the first Brody match is a fascinating kind of a rabbit hole we could fall down there, Oracle. What did you make of this, brother?
Yeah, this was fun. Rude takes a couple of great bumps to the floor here, including the first one that Alex mentioned, where he just like hits like his leg hits the ropes and he just like fucking hits shoulder first really hard on the fucking concrete.
And Bill Mercer lets you know the wooden planks over the silver and blue of the Dallas Cowboys.
But honestly, my favorite part of this whole thing was like the viciousness of the brawling in the post match, because it actually looked like two guys getting in a bar fight, unlike what it looks like now, where everyone does fucking embarrassing hockey fight fisticuffs. It's fucking awful. Like this actually looked like an actual fight. It's funny because it goes to show you that back in the 80s, I mean, like, this is basically a fight between a arm wrestler and a journalist. So, I mean, that's essentially what it is.
Speaking of such, an early Meltzer moment here as he gives it the big 3.5 treatment. I wonder if one of these fellas was talking to Dave. I wonder. I wonder. Anyway, I like the MJF match on the weekend. Anyway, shout out to Big Dave. But yeah, sorry, I cut you off. Anything else?
No, you're good. But yeah, it's just just goes to show that I'm not sure most journalists today could throw hands like Bruiser Brody could.
Smart guy, which makes his maneuverings of the wrestling business more fascinating.
Yes.
He would actually be like, now that we're doing these wrestling film projects and stuff, Brody would actually be a fascinating topic, because the character is one thing, the reality of that character is another, and then the third thing is the actual person behind it who was like, I mean, one of the all-time, I mean, obviously, I don't need to explain why, but the wrestling towel is just all over the place. Fascinating.
The first episode ever, the pilot of Dark Side of the Ring, was about Bruiser Brody, and I remember the thing about that was like, they found footage and pictures of him back when he was a journalist and first starting in wrestling and stuff, but that was only like, the first 10 minutes, I was like, no, I want more of that. I know what happens. So to your point, yeah, it's an interesting story.
Very interesting. And when you have the tie to Handsome, where they're like both on the same football team, we just were talking about this earlier, that crew. But the idea of those two guys being on the same football team and then eventually being like the two most iconic Gaijins ever is like a fascinating situation. But it just so happened that when I was watching this, Mama Holbert was around.
Uh-oh.
And Bill Mercer was so infuriating that she felt the need to note it to me and walked away in disgust. And all I could think was, if only she could hear what I'm about to hear in the next match, because David Crockett is about to arrive. And we are...
my
brothers, I say this, I do not say this lightly. We've been doing this for almost 3 years, as Oracle said. We're going to talk about the match a little bit, because it is important. It's a big match for a group. This match features one of the most extraordinary announcing jobs and not even necessarily in a good way. Just extraordinary is the best I've got. It's the only word I've got to. David Crockett on our next match is, even for David Crockett standards, unhinged. And go for it, Oracle.
Okay, so listen. First of all, this match is outstanding in my opinion.
Yeah, we'll circle back. But go for it.
But David Crockett is like a dad or an uncle who like is kind of annoying like on Thanksgiving and is like talking about the game, the football game, and he's like, for example, there's a part where they're working over an arm and David's just like whispering, he's like, okay, working the arm. He's gotta stay in the arm. Stay in the arm. And it's like it sounds like a dad like watching, you're watching the fucking game. He's got, he's a little bit, 3 or 4 beers deep, turkey full and shit and all this stuff. And he's talking about, he's saying all this shit, and it's like, it gets really fucking annoying, and you're like, all right, like.
But then he'll just like yell out of nowhere.
Get
around,
dude. When at one point Paul Jones goes near one of the baby, I can't remember if it was Ricky or Robert, and he goes, "Oh God, Paul! Oh no!" He doesn't interfere. He just goes near him, and he thinks he's going to, and he panics. He's honestly like, because this match is long too. You get like
he's literally a mark.
Yeah, 100%.
On commentary, and he's like literally like freaking out. There's something. It's absolutely terrible, but to this day I still think there's a charm to it.
Oh, there's a charm. There's absolutely a charm.
There's no like in terms of guys marking out, I prefer Don West.
Yeah.
In terms of like guys marking out for like what they're watching. So like here's the rankings of commentary analysts marking out. Don West is 1, David Crockett 2, and then all the way down, in the depths of hell is Matt Stryker. So those are the 3 guys.
Somewhere that coming.
Somewhere there in the upper tier, the very few times, like I'm thinking of Survivor Series 03, there was a couple times where Jerry Lawler would get so swept up by a babyface's performance, he would root for the good guy. And, Jerry Lawler, we don't need to go there. But those were always great performances as well. Because and Jim Ross, obviously. There, to your point, like with Don West, there's something so infectious about a guy like, It's like the local radio station that you're listening to for like a game or something. Yeah.
And David Crockett's like in between there where he's super annoying, but there is, to me, he sounds more like a fan who's marking out.
That's
like
the thing, Don West is
he sounds like the obnoxious ringside fan who's like awesome, like back in the 80s and old school, but like he doesn't need to be in the fucking commentary booth,
when Don West does it, you're like, dudes rock. When David Crockett is, all right, man, take it easy, it's very different.
This match is fucking awesome. They do a double heat where and by the way, Raging and Ravishing were a fucking tremendous tag team.
Yes.
That like had a bunch of really good matches.
This up. Sorry, we should set this. It's my fault because we jumped ahead, but we should set this up because we're talking David Crockett. I'll go straight back to you just quickly for anyone wondering, because I know not everyone watches the matches. And what are we even talking about here? Rick Rude, Manny Fernandez, Oracle was just talking about versus the Rock and Roll Express. He jumped to Crockett in September '86. He and Manny are paired up. They call him the Awesome Twosome for a while here, which is hilarious. Yeah. Paul Jones is their manager. This is December 6th, 1986 edition of World Championship Wrestling. Taped on November 30th. This is relevant for Grin Grappler purposes because it is right after Starrcade 86, where the Rock and Roll worked on and only, which we just covered. Oracle, pick up where you was, mate. Sorry, I just wanted to set that up. Go for it.
So their gear's awesome here. Their purple matching gear. Just the early portions are like, because like a lot of times I'll multitask when I'm trying to like do a bunch of things at once because I'm crazy like that. But I couldn't look away from like their fucking rope running sequences early. It frustrates me that wrestlers today don't do that shit, man.
Yeah. Like
Manny Fernandez, some big motherfucker, 275 pounds out here doing fucking incredible rope running sequences with the Rock and Roll Express is like I can't look away at that. So they do this long double heat. Match goes 30 minutes. And they work over Robert's leg. They work over Ricky's arm. Ricky's had like a taped up arm. Ricky, of course, one of the all-time. He basically made Face and Peril in tag wrestling. And just incredible here. Studios. I mean, everybody. Ricky, rock and roll. All these chants. I mean, everybody's just totally invested. No one more invested than David Crockett, of course.
Of course.
And Paul Jones is on ringside and, yapping away on commentary and getting involved and whatnot. And it's just, everything's so simple, right? Like just working over the body part. There's no like intricate, like, and don't get me wrong, like I love like cool little sequences that the wrestlers do nowadays and intricate detailed body work that they can do. But you just work over the body part. And there's a connection with the audience that these guys have in the studio here that's missing in a lot of wrestling today. And none of the work is particularly flashy, only when they make the comebacks and the drop kicks and stuff. There's one incredible hope spot where Rick Rude takes a back body drop and fucking hits ass first on the ropes and fucking spikes himself, and David Crockett literally loses his fucking mind. And like he starts bursting out loud. Oh, Rick, what up? Oh. And of course, Tony Schiavone's doing play-by-play, desperately trying to get in a word edgewise, but he can't because David Crockett won't shut the fuck up. but yeah, this match is awesome. They had the finish where the finish is really well done, where they do the interference spot and they do the roll up, and I think they grab the tights there right at the end, and when Rude and Manny win the tag belts. David Crockett is outraged. This is the kind of stuff you'd see in Crockett like every fucking week, man. In the Omni, in Charlotte.
The key here, the novelty here is that it's a TV deal, right? Correct. That's what makes it, very interesting.
And it's on TV, and they would do that several times a year. They would have, from 85 to 80, 88, they would have these big matches. Flair and Wyndham in 87, right? Like they would have these matches that were on TV that would just blow away. Just to give you that taste. But awesome match, awesome performance from everybody involved. I mean, Rude was tremendous. His bumping's awesome. I mean, just like his spot. I mean, the bump where he takes the back body drop into the ropes is the highlight of the match for me. Just an incredible spot. Great match. Great match. One of the many great tag matches of the 80s, but definitely one worth watching.
Yeah, the other thing that makes this kind of cool from a historic point of view, this gets like a one-night setup like we get often nowadays, where it's like the show starts without this match being booked, and then like they challenge them within the show and they accept the chat. Like, so this, I mean, there's an idea I think online that's like a thing that was invented on Raw in 1999. It's like absolutely not. Like these things can be traced back. And Bob, I'm intrigued where you stand this because this gets a lot of time. This is not a sprint, folks. I have to say, you got to pack your lunch for this one.
Mm-hmm.
They take up a lot of TV. They even get a post-match interview, which is hilarious for David Crockett reasons. We'll get back to that. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm intrigued. Where did you stand on this?
Yeah, I thought it was maybe a little too long for my personal liking, but like once I settled in, the final 20 minutes or so, I enjoyed quite a bit. Like I think the finish in general is quite good, and I mean, but with the context of they weren't doing this on TV, like it's different, so that comes into play, and like, but yeah, I mean, it just. I could imagine, sitting down and watching this and loving it, in the moment when it aired live. It just, I think knowing how long it's going to be can sometimes, for me personally, kind of take it down a little bit. But it was good.
I'm actually not. I'm pretty close to where you're at in the sense that I do think like the second heat is long for me. But it is hard to, this is where context really, really matters in the sense that, as you said, there's such a novelty for people being able to see this match on TV at the time that's hard to recapture. Interesting one. Alex, where did you stand on that, mate?
It's a lot of fun. It is like I felt they could have, and this isn't even just like it's long by modern standards, because
it ain't. AW full gear.
I'm refraining from commenting on last Saturday night right now. The problem is that they could have the apex of it they missed, and the finish could have gotten like a bigger reaction.
I think so.
They wouldn't have built it so long. But Manny Fernandez, just a force of nature. There's an opening stretch here with Robert Gibson and Rick Rude. They're not quite, but they're doing like the original iterations of like Tajiri and super crazy shit. They're ducking clotheslines and hitting the ropes and missing each other. And there's later in the match, because they're learning each other's counters. The FTR should do this. Rick shoots him off the ropes, and then he lays down on his back as though he's gonna monkey flip him, but his head's towards Robert, so Robert just comes into a fist drop. It's this awesome, like, just because he did it early in the match, so he learned from it, and that shit ain't difficult. That back body drop he mentioned is fantastic. Ricky's selling. I mean, we've already talked about the Rock and Roll Express, but Ricky Morton, like, he looks like he's actually in pain, and he wants someone in the crowd to help him. Like, it's something special. My sister walked by when I was watching it. She's like, "Is that the guy that still has the same hairstyle?" I was like, "Yep."
Oh yeah,
that's Ricky, brother. This crowd does not let up. Where it got to the point where it felt like playing Warzone or one of the Acclaim games on PlayStation 1 where the crowd chants for your entire match. The main one I remember is they made the ECW game for PlayStation. And when you played as New Jack, like for the whole fucking match, the crowd would just be going, New Jack, New Jack, New Jack, New Jack. And that's what it felt like here with just rock and roll, rock and roll. And they're, God bless them, they're having fun with it because they're coming up with different cadences for their chants. So like, break it, Ricky, break it off, Ricky. And these girls in the crowd are just having such a fucking ball with it. And it makes it all the better that they're not trying to get themselves over because they all scream in terror at the end of the match which is an awesome finish, by the way, the O'Connor roll. And then Rude hits the big close, or is it Manny that clotheslines and Rude pulls the trunks?
Rude clotheslines, I think.
Yes, he does because he fucking takes his head off. Yeah, I love the finish. And the post-match promo where I was trying to get a grip on what they were calling themselves because at one point it's the awesome twosome and then it's the gruesome twosome and then it's not rock and roll, it's heavy metal, baby, and so it's a wonderful studio wrestling presentation. Not the complaint, I guess the criticism would be if you just shaved 5 to 6 minutes off, maybe the crowd would have been even more heated by the finish, but in the ring, it's fun, and then the audio from it, too, is quite the fucking experience.
Paul Jones has this line.
Gotta work on his arm. Watch his arm.
Paul Jones has this line both before and after the match where he says, fans can now be happy because they have champions that they don't have to worry about losing. I was like, what a fascinating approach to wrestling fandom Paul Jones has here. He's like, fans will be relieved now. They don't have to worry about our guys losing ever. And it's like, well, I mean, I don't know how it works, but all right, Paul, it works for me. We should know that on the finish, David Crockett yells, no, no, no. And then he confronts them afterwards, which is beast. It has to be said, because this is probably, I don't know how often we're going to talk about him. I mentioned earlier there are some guys who are completely lost to history. Manny Fernandez is absolutely one of them, dude.
Oh, Raging Bull fucking ruled, man.
I think he's like honestly the best guy in this match, and that's like I say that not lightly because Ricky Morton's incredible, and obviously Rick Rude's our focus. He's the glue here to me, though, man. Like he makes Rude's work so much easier and his night so much easier. He's so good, and I don't know how many of our people watching this are even aware or familiar with Manny Fernandez, but he's terrific, and
he's one of many '80s stars that sort of has vanished into history because he didn't have a Fed run. Like he's a guy like a Jerry Blackwell who was an awesome wrestler too. Mm-hmm. Who like no one talks about because the winners tell the story, right? The winners tell the history, and those two guys and many others, Eric Embry, right? Like these guys didn't have runs in the Fed, so they're not really
sad.
They're not really talked about a lot.
Especially it's sad because some guys were like big factors in their prime, and it's sad that gets lost.
Bill Dundee, he's another one, right?
Yeah.
He's
absolutely.
Yeah.
There's nothing big about Bill Dundee, I'll tell you that.
By the way, Alex, do you remember? You were talking about the crowd chanting so much that it became like absurd.
Yeah.
Do you remember when that happened at Full Sail? This is a genuine. I'm not doing a bit here, I promise. This happened for a tag match at Full Sail. Do any of you remember what it was? The crowd were chanting for both teams back and forth so much that it became like obnoxious almost, which wasn't Full Sail's first.
Was one of the original takeovers?
It was not. It was I'd say 2018 TV match, tag title match. It got 5 from Dave. That will limit down for you.
Oh,
I know what it is.
Mustache Mountain and Undisputed Era.
Yeah.
I
swear, rewatch that match. For some reason, that match has like a 1979 atmosphere, and the crowd's like, obviously not fully because some people are trying for the heels, but whatever. Dude, they're losing their minds, and they're going back with Undisputed Mustache, and they did it for the whole match. I saw it not that long ago, which is why this comes to mind. And also Roderick Strong. All right. Act 1, Ravishing Rick Rude in the books. Any other matches call out? So I did a little research. I haven't seen these. I'm noting them because they seem to get positive reviews. There's a Jerry Lawler cage match that people seem to be fond of, which would be an interesting watch because, as we said, Memphis was obviously a big stop for him where he kind of found himself and got a push. There's also some Kerry Von Erich matches that got decent reviews on the cage match from his world-class run, of course. So those are the things that I kind of highlight. Anything pre the OBF that you guys would like to know?
Man, I wonder if he and Kevin Von Erich ever tangled. That would have been a fun
Let's have a look.
brawl, I assume. Yeah, I don't know. My knowledge of his pre-WWF stuff is pretty limited.
He was the main event of the recent Omni show they uploaded, right? Well, he wasn't the main event. He was our main event because they lost the Flair tape, which was hilarious, by the way. What a show to pick that was. My goodness. Kevin Von Erich. Yeah. Anything come to mind, Oracle?
I mean, the Memphis stuff is stuff that I've seen maybe one or two matches that I honestly don't have much of a recollection of, but I know that the Lawler stuff in '84 is pretty highly touted.
Mm-hmm.
And '84 is like considered the best year in the history of Memphis by a lot of people. So
that'll be interesting then. Okay.
Yeah.
Kevin Von Erich, Rick Rude, 2 singles matches, both at the Sportatorium. March 28th, 86, August 15th, 86. I don't have this tape of either. We must find and hunt these down.
I'll be on the hunt. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, mate. Appreciate it. All right. Rude left suddenly in, I believe, May of 87. Still World's Tag Team Champions, by the way. Right. And like they did the deal where they like show a house show match, like pretend the finish was like, they do something like that. I forget what they do, but they do some sort of brother explanation of his departure. And he heads to the WWF. He starts making towns with them in early June and emerges on TV the following month. He is, of course, paired famously with Bobby the Brain Heenan, who there's a lot of kind of folklore about him not being too fond of that pairing, which is like an interesting thing considering how iconic it is. I don't know the details of it. It's obviously not something we're going to have any follow-up on. The understanding is that he kind of felt like he didn't need Bobby to get heat, was the... Now, again, I don't know if that's how he felt when he went there. I would probably assume not, because, like, when you went there, getting put with Bobby Heenan was a really big deal. He may have felt that way in 1989, however, right? I could definitely see that. Either way, that launched a feud with Orndorff, who, was leaving the group, and that was a feud we almost covered here. He then goes into the Jake Roberts feud, which makes up most of his 1988 most. Even when he's working with other people, he's feuding with Jake Roberts, right? That's kind of his lead conflict throughout that year.
He was brought in the Heenan family, and we covered that Survivor Series match from the original Survivor Series. Yeah,
yeah, where he's the one guy that can bump. It's awesome.
That's right.
So sick, dude.
It is.
His program with Warrior is kicked off at Rumble 89, where they do these super pose down and things of that nature. Setting up the WrestleMania match where Rude wins with the deal where Heenan grabs Warrior's foot, which is a finish that like
horrifying
is borrowed. Is borrowed every turn. And that, of course, brings us to our first match here, August 29th, 1989, SummerSlam. Feel the heat. Rude Warrior 2. IC title, the rematch from Rude's WrestleMania win. We should note before we get there because it's relevant on the finish. Roddy Piper recently had some issues with Rick Rude. There's that episode of Primetime Wrestling where they're talking trash the whole entire episode, going back and forth and doing some business, which would pay off later. But for now, let's talk Feel the Heat. Bobby, Warrior, Rude, SummerSlam. What did you think, brother?
Yeah, I enjoyed this match. Was not expecting to get Tony and Jesse on the call. I knew obviously they were both there, but didn't really hit with me that it was this show until we got them. So it was a nice treat. I like the Mania match a little bit better, but Rude had 2 passable matches with Warrior, so that puts him in a better spot than a lot of the guys in the roster. It was a good time. There's a couple things like the title shot that the ref clearly sees and has to pretend not to see, and like the Piper stuff is kind of stupid, whatever. But like overall, it's a fun time, and like I said, probably one of the 4 or 5 best Warrior WWF matches, which is a testament probably to Rude, but also Warrior worked hard here as well.
He did.
I'm a little higher on this than you are, Bobby, I must say. I'm sure where the lads stand on it. In many ways, I think this is actually the most impressive Warrior match. Hold on. Because this doesn't have like the kind of pomp and circumstance, spectacle elements that like the big time, the big booming Savage match does, the Warrior, the Hogan match does. This is like a kind of conventional wrestling match for the most part. And they go 16 minutes. And the fact that I think it's like legitimately good, I think is kind of a testament to Rude. Intrigued where the lads stand on this. Oracle, what did you make of this one, mate?
Yeah. So I love this match for a long time, and it still holds up. I think it's actually probably like arguably a top 50 match of the in the WWF in the 80s. I think it's that good. I think it's one of those matches where you can kind of tell that like Pat Patterson helped put it together, like it's one of those Pat specials. He was so gifted putting matches together. And Rude and Warrior were terrific here. The face shine goes a bit long, but it's still so fun to watch Rick Rude just take insane bumps and do all kinds of shit. I was popping. I forget the spots in this match. First of all, Tony Schiavone is awesome as play-by-play in this match.
Yeah.
Yes.
He is great in this match.
And they're a great team. They're a great team, which we'd learn, later.
Yeah. There's so many great. There's awesome spots that made me audibly pop that I totally forgot about. I forgot about the Ganzo bomb, which was fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Because right when he hit it, I was like, "Oh, I forgot he did that in this match." I was literally losing my mind. And then Warrior hits a fucking German suplex.
Yes.
Yeah, he's Gary Albright.
This match was this is a tremendously great match. The finish is ridiculous, but I legitimately think it's a top 50 match from the Fed in the 80s. Awesome match. Just an awesome performance from both guys. Rude was bumping all over the place the first half. Big offense, shit you never see. The Ganzo bomb, though I'm sure it wasn't on purpose, but still, seeing it was holy fucking shit.
And he trusts Warrior to do a pile driver too.
I was about to say Warrior hits a pile driver in this match.
Yep.
See, there's a lot of lore about this pairing because allegedly, I think pretty much been confirmed at this point that at some point Warrior was saying something about Rick Rude when he wasn't there, and Rick Rude shut up and beat the hell out of him. That's allegedly. Again, I'll use that again just in case. I don't know if Dana Warrior is watching. But she didn't do anything. But he apparently beat him up in front of the boys.
She did do some things, but not in this,
But this, this is the most famous rival of Rude's career. I mean, it just is. That's the reality of it, right? I mean, I think, I think they're so tied together, and the reason for that is they consistently went to Rude as a heel that could just get good wrestling matches out for it. I think this is the best of those. And it's weird because stylistically, you wouldn't necessarily assume that's the way. With how kind of rugged Rude could be, you wouldn't necessarily assume it. But he brings the best out of Warrior, dude. It's a fascinating.
How about his hair in 1989, huh? How about the Ravishing one's hair in fucking 89? Good lord.
He looks ridiculous in all these, but he looks incredible here, dude. It's outrageous. He's definitely one of those guys who, I think he leaves the WWF kind of fully aware that it was not in his power anymore, right? He did everything possible across the line and truly become I was going to say it was a not so Freudian in this case, but Alex, what did you make of this one, mate?
I think one of the most important things we need to call out here is that this match gave us, it's the blooper from the promo before it of Mean Gene. Fuck it. Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived. The Ultimate Warrior. Boom. Fuck it. All right. Well, I need to talk about too. Earlier in the day of the SummerSlam, Ravishing Rick Rude and Bobby Heenan were the guests on Regis and Kathy Lee in the morning, and I posted the climax of that appearance in promotion for this show. But it's a good appearance of they bring out Rude first for the Intercontinental title, and for those who don't know and aren't old like me, Regis Philbin was a fan of wrestling, and he was kind of the reason that even into the death days of 95, they got wrestlers on Regis and Kathy Lee in the morning. Regis was one of the Master of Ceremonies at WrestleMania 7. Like, he just liked wrestling and he liked the characters and stuff. So you can find plenty of examples of wrestlers being on, and even ones you would be like, interesting. Diesel in a suit with the WWF title was on there one time, and Kathy leaves. She's giving him the eyes, not Rick Rude, but Diesel. She sees and she's like, "Oh my god!" But anyway, Rick Rude comes out with the IC belt, and Regis gets the hole. He's like, "Oh boy, I've always wanted to have one of these." And what's really funny is if you've seen how the skit play or the appearance plays out, like the whole time Regis is telling Rick to take his robe off. He's like, "Let's see it, Rick. Let's see it." And he's like, No, wait for it." And when they bring out Heenan separate from Rick Rude, and Heenan's coming out with his back turned to the camera, like pointing back behind the curtain, like, no. And then he gets out and he's like, "Your assistant Jeannie's back there trying to get out here and get a rude awakening. I'm trying to stop her from doing," Heenan just always on. But anyway, it's kind of shocking for daytime television they did this, but they did the whole Rude act where he picked a girl out from the crowd and brought her up and planted a big kiss on her. It made her faint. She fell down, and then the payoff is he takes his robe off, and he's been like hitting on Kathy Lee this entire segment, and she's like, "Ugh," and her face is airbrushed on the crotch of his tights, and and she, like, her reaction's very genuine, and just like she's like, "Oh my fucking god." And then he turns around with his ass to the camera, and Regis' face is on the ass of the tights. So it's and he goes up to her, and doesn't age well, but it's kind of funny. You can see him pretty much tell her, like, "Run away from me and I'll act like I'm chasing you." And props to her, dude. She like does a fucking 50-yard dash in high heels getting away from him. But in classic Bret Hart fashion, in promotion of it, he does say that I'm going to take care of the Ultimate Warrior at the SummerSlam, is how he refers to it. But we get here, and it's time to feel the heat. I already mentioned Rick Rude, a man of many, many ring attires, and the awesome, like, melting Ultimate Warrior logo on his tights for this one is just fantastic. The whole crowd is so, I mean, this isn't exclusive to this. It's just how hot the WWF was at the time, but it's different. The dads with their kids are like, there's some just yoked up New Yorker in the crowd in a, like, fucking wife beater and big gold chain that, like, when Warrior slams him, he's just, it's just, it's just so funny how into everything people were back in the day. But similar to the Robert Gibson exchange, there's a really sweet series, like, of high spots here where Warrior and Rude are ducking each other's clotheslines, and it's they do it for the length of time that Jim Hellwig could memorize, so it shuts down pretty quick. But it's a fun little opening there. We do some brawling on the outside to where Warrior just hits Rude with the belt, and Jesse has a fucking stroke on commentary, and he's, "Where the hell's the referee? That's a disqualification." And then Shivani goes, "Well, it's outside the ring." And Jesse goes, "So you can just shoot someone if it's on the outside of the ring?" And Warrior suplexes Rude on the outside of the ring, gives him a vertical suplex. Like, the crowd starts chanting ECW shortly after that. And the weirdest thing about this is Warrior, we've seen him do the double axe handle before, but there's this visual of the Ultimate Warrior perched on the top rope like he's Rey Mysterio Jr., where he's, he's holding onto the rope and just waiting for Rude to turn around. It looks so strange. This is the first example in our matches of Rick Rude selling an atomic drop, so we get that. There's a pretty long heat segment. Joe, did you notice at one point Rick Rude gives the Ultimate Warrior a Mongolian chop like he's Kazushi Sakuraba? He's standing over him and gives him one of these. I was like, what the fuck? Gonzo Bomb we called out. I think there's a total of 3 pile drivers in this match. Piper comes out. For those listening, we did discuss before we went live, this is the episode with the highest abundance of man ass of any entry in the Grin Grappler, and this is the first example of Piper mooning him as we go to a wide shot. And then fresh off his run in UWFI, Jim Hellwig hits a German suplex, dropping Rick Rude on the back of his head. And then, he hits his finish and pins him, and the crowd goes nuts. And it's just, I don't know if I like it as much as Oracle, but I like it a lot. And it's a classic example of, the concept of this stuff, when done correctly, works out pretty well.
Yeah, this is like the one reason I think Oracle's the way you kind of contextualized it of an 80s WWF classic or hit is this is so 80s WWF, right? Like this is like everything good about that era is kind of captured here. And I really wish we knew more about Rude's status as like the Warrior Whisperer, because like, dude, the Savage match. So we've discussed the Randy Savage Warrior match. Alex's review of that match is I think one of the best Grin Grappler moments. I recommend anyone who hasn't seen it go watch the Randy Savage show. It's great. I mean it sincerely. I love that, and I love that match. I think it's a better match than this, but that is a lot easier to understand in the sense that we know how Randy Savage operated. And it's like it's Randy Savage kind of magnum opus to his brain, right? Mm-hmm. This is just like a wrestling match, dude.
Yeah.
Like, why is this so good? I have no clue. Well, I think the rest of the Rude Warrior matches are like solid and fun, which is a good achievement in itself. But like, I just find this to be a bit of a triumph, especially at this length too.
Watching it through this lens, it made me realize that I just conflated all of their matches together because the cage match has some fun to it, but this is like legitimately good. And I forgot how good it was. One of my guilty pleasure matches is on this show, and that's kind of what always comes to mind. It's the Twin Towers and Andre against Demolition and Hacksaw Jim Duggan. So for whatever reason, this match was buried in the recesses of my mind, so I'm really glad we got to bring it to light today.
Yeah, because I remember when we were putting it together, you were kind of torn on the SummerSlam matches, right? I remember we talked about this. Yeah, it's just sometimes you forget these things. It's you mentioned the referee being that ref bump. It's like a big old collision takes place there, isn't it? My goodness, that's quite the deal. By the way, we should know we've talked a lot about Rick Rude, the Rude Awakening. Super over as a finish, and the way he would use it in his matches, like he really got that as to a point where the audience really respected as a finish. He hooks him for it in this SummerSlam match, and the people like gasp in response. Like he got that move over. And I think sometimes we take for granted the art form that is like getting your finisher over, right? And like what that means. And he did that wonderfully. Interestingly, our last match, there's a bit of a shift in that regard, but and on a more negative note, this is where we get our first exposure to the dub theme we mentioned earlier. That makes me very mad. Very, very mad. But this rocks, dude. Yeah.
If we can take a minute to appreciate the aesthetic, because where we're moving next, we've been here before. We've been at MSG house show matches before. But to appreciate the aesthetic of 80s and into the early 90s WWF, not just the red, white, and blue ropes, but like the crowd is lit. The entranceway is just that fucking metallic logo hanging above it. And, for those of us who have traveled far and wide for wrestling shows of today, there is something fun about seeing like, those big stages and LED walls and all that. But man, you look at this just from like a watching at home perspective, the crowd looks like it goes on forever. And it's just when modern wrestling fans that prefer modern wrestling don't understand why someone like myself sometimes can, subscribe to the used to be better. It's like, because when I watch this, it makes me feel warm and fuzzy. It makes me feel like Christmas. I'm like, all right, this is a safe space now. So I always think of the original SummerSlams, like 88, 89, 90, and 91 is like the epitome of that era of WWF with like just almost like fuzzy around the edges.
Yeah. I will say, just quickly while we're on this topic, there have been positive steps in that regard, in the sense of there have been some big WWE shows in this decade that were, by their standards, minimalist. Like that thing they've been doing recently with the walkway that curves. They do it in some buildings where they want to sell the back. So like, you remember the Puerto Rico show where they it wasn't a ramp or a stage. It was just like a walkway that curved around so they could get as many people in there as possible. They did it in London too when I was there. So
I remember
a cool development. Yeah.
SummerSlam 2021, Bobby was there too. I just assumed they did that because it was like the first big event after COVID. So it was like they didn't have time to put anything together. But I remember that just marking out and going in there that there was like, there was kind of like the video strip behind where they were coming out, but it was just dudes coming through a walkway. I was like, fuck
yeah. So it's kind of bad, and I'm intrigued.
And gals, excuse me.
Yeah, we can't get ahead of ourselves, but the chat's bringing up. Be interested in the presentation for Saturday night's main event, right? I think
Yeah.
it feels like Jesse Ventura is going to be there, which is
Give him a
about
live mic.
Dude, it's like 90% of the attraction for me, and I'm looking forward to the wrestling match on it too. So it'll be very interesting.
Honestly, I really want. I mean, like, not that he would care at all, but like, I don't know, just the idea of him like calling like Cody and Kevin.
Yeah.
Him like taking Kevin Owens' side would be incredible.
Oh, just go like winding the clock back like that.
Yeah.
Why can Cody Rhodes wear a weight belt to the ring? I don't understand. Dude. What you need on that show is Jesse does a live interview with either Punk or Kevin Owens. Just let those guys riff together.
Punk would be incredible. Yes. Tremendous stuff. But as you mentioned, we've been here before. Let's jump ahead. December 28th was the date on this, correct? December 28th, 1989. I'm sorry, my note was wrong for some reason. MSG, Roddy Piper, Rick Rude. The finish set us up. We have physical media. Alex, explain the physical media, mate. Explain.
It's one of the bonus matches on the Roddy Piper Born to Controversy set. When you sent this over and it was a steel cage match, I was like, this sounds familiar. So this is now the second time this has been utilized for Grin Grappler episodes, because this also has the Brett 8 match on it and the Piper Backlot Brawl. And for some reason, Hogan and Piper from Starrcade 96. I wouldn't really want to broadcast that. But
hold on. Don't be so hasty. There's some stuff to be found in there, brother. But that's another conversation for another day. Nonetheless, MSG, this is kind of a natural follow-up, right? They just had that finish at SummerSlam. Now they're taking this match on the around the horn. And that's what this program is like. Their matches are basically just like an extended run of house shows. That's the way this business used to work, right? I mean, you do your business on the road, brother, and they take it all over the place, the cage match included. This is the most famous. There's another match I want to say at the Garden that's like non-stip, but this is the one that people, there's a contingent of fans that like adore this match, and I can see why, because this is just great fun. I mean, tremendous energy. We've discussed before how kind of Dirty Bear in the 80s was different. If you want to learn more about that, the On Anderson, so we had a pretty extended segment about how kind of house shows. It's very different to what we have now. And I think you get a good look at that here because we get some juice. We get a whole lot here. Bobby, what did you make of this, brother?
Yeah, I thought this ruled, honestly. It might have been my favorite match that we did. You get some using the cage as a weapon. Piper gets a strap in there early. You can go through the door now. That's the whole thing. We get the false finish at first where they got to restart it, which was fun, the first time when they both jumped off. Then they'd repeat that, 30 times the next 30 years. Rude bleeding, like you said, was not expecting that. And then Rude also jumps off the top of the cage and appears to land like right on his leg, but, probably fine. And yeah, I really like the end where Rude's hanging off and just kind of like does a sit up to get back to the top of the cage. And then, the ending, it's, when you introduce a weapon and it gets used against you, you can't feel bad about that. So that's Rude's own fault on the ending.
My God, did you just do like a David Crockett bit here on the Grin Grappler?
But yeah, it ruled.
It's very, very fun. Piper's energy is central to that, and Rude is right there with him. Rude takes an insane bump into the cage within like 1 minute of the match starting. Yeah, I was like, the brothers have brought their working boots tonight. Oracle, what did you make of this, mate?
Yeah, so this is very good. This is a ton of fun. I'd never seen this one. I'd never seen this. Cool. I'd never seen the rock and roll tag. Yeah, so this is one of the matches I'd never seen before, and of course, I'd known about it, but yeah, Rude takes a fucking Irish whip bump into the fucking cage, Piper Irish whips him, and then Rude just decides to go flying, head like shoulder blade and head first into the fucking cage. Just an insane bump. The spot where he fucking does a flying knee drop off the cage, insane. I did not realize he did that. So Piper pantses Rude 2 minutes into the match, and Rude literally wrestles with his ass out for the entire match.
Beast.
Which is pretty impressive in and of itself, to be honest. They do the. I've never seen this. Maybe I've seen it once before, but I've seen because like they've done the. Do you remember when they did the Cena Seth Freakin table match of TLC and chairs 14, where they both went to the table and they did instant replay.
Oh,
yeah.
Instead the match to keep going.
I probably watched that, but I don't remember it. No, sir.
But yeah, this is. I don't know if I've ever seen a cage match where they did both land on the floor and they made him restart. So I'd never seen that before. So that was kind of a cool twist to throw in there, and I actually kind of liked the restart because it showed that Rude kind of had to still deal with Piper there. But yeah, this is a lot of fun. Piper open the door at the end, and stomping his way out. It was quite amusing. But yeah, just a really, really fun performance from Rude here. I mean, props. I mean, the dude works, 15 minutes with his ass out. So I mean, it was an impressive performance, and I still can't get over he just decided to randomly do a flying fucking knee drop from the top of the cage, which was insane. And that's this is the old school blue bar cage, which it feels like if you didn't hold handle your weight well enough up there, the whole fucking thing would tip over. So
it's also the old WWF ring that was harder than concrete. So Rude's lucky he didn't blow his knee out or break his shin or something.
Yeah, again, it goes back to what I mentioned. I think he was someone who was really driven to be a true top guy out there. And I think that would obviously reveal itself the following summer, bring the end of his run. Alex, firstly, had you seen this before? And secondly, what did you make of it?
I remember watching the matches on that Piper DVD at some point in time.
Media.
Physical media, that's right. Big Blue, the cage. I stood up, took my hat off. I don't know if y'all covered this already. Is it Hillbilly Jim that's with Monsoon?
Yeah.
Okay.
It sure is, brother.
We get more man ass and we get juice. Rick Rude runs the razor for the industry here. My notes said the ring is not budging, which no, it's not. Ridiculous Rude dive. I immediately was like, that's so pro wrestling. That had to fuck him up so much more than the other guy. Not quite Samoa Joe Sting at Bound for Glory 08, but somewhere in that galaxy.
It would have been a good program, brother. Sam Joe, Rick Rude. He had some material with Joe, I feel like,
Oh,
time
yeah.
in that one. Yeah.
There would be a lot of comments on Joe's physique. I could see that.
Oh, I'm sure. It'd be pretty good. Yeah.
Thinking Rude fighting out of the Coquina clutch, then that would be funny.
Yeah.
There's a great pile driver in this match as well. It's a standard. This is a match that if I went to a house show at Madison Square Garden for the World Wrestling Federation in any point in time between 1985 and 1995, I would expect to see something exactly like this. And it delivers on that front. And, from our Piper episode, we talk about my Piper is always shoulder length hair Piper. I know that's a very short window of time, but, they live Piper is what I think of when I think of, his run. So, you can't go wrong with this.
We must discuss Gorilla Monsoon, who at one point there is a double down head clash situation, and the referee begins to count, and this enrages Gorilla, who begins to yell, I don't know what you're counting, ref.
Yes.
Lectures him about the rules from his announce booth, which is awesome. The spot that we mentioned earlier where Rude is hanging over the top of the cage is terrifying. I know that he used to do that spot a lot just to pop himself because he would sit up. It was just a test of his own physical strength. But it looks horrifying here because he's just hanging. And I wouldn't trust Roddy Piper with that task either. So he's kind of... But yeah, this... Also, did you guys notice, I don't know how everyone watched it, they played Rude's music on the finish. Did anyone mention this? Did I miss it? Did you guys have the same issue? So this probably was fixed on the physical media, but on the version list that I watched, when Piper wins, they play Rick Rude's theme and then they cut it and switch to Roddy's theme. It's an incredible deal. So that was fun. But yeah, this is a very, very fun time. And again, it's, we stressed this before, but what Alex said a moment ago about a house show from 89 to 95, whatever, it's a house show at the Garden was a very, very different thing then. It's still obviously a cool thing for the talent. They obviously recognize that, but it's not. Guys aren't running the razor and jumping off the cage and stuff. That's not really what you do at the house shows nowadays. So
yeah,
it's a different thing. Very, very fun. Now, unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, in fact, because then what you would end up doing, we were within, we're headed to the final year of Rhodes' WWF career, right? He beefs up, as we mentioned, he cuts the hair, and he's which is all part of like the Warrior build, and he has those like training camp vignettes and stuff. Because he is on the road to SummerSlam 1990, where he would wrestle the cage match with the Ultimate Warrior. Before that, they do a very bizarre build for that match, where they wrestle on Saturday night's main event, and like Rude doesn't even really get like much of a flattering presentation there, and they use it as a SummerSlam main. It's bizarre.
So you may be going here, Joe. I was just about to ask, like, I assume it's brother that steps in here, because after WrestleMania 6, Warrior's the champion, but he just goes back to doing what he's doing, and Hogan moves on to doing what Hogan does, where a new big man comes in. And, not to say Warrior's title reign would have been a massive success otherwise, but it seems like it was definitely set up for failure.
If you were to defend Hulk Hogan, which I'll let Bob do that, you would say it could have been equally. Rude was just one of the guys they trusted to have, real matches with Warrior, right? You could equally argue that. We should now, this is a good point, because we're about to wrap up this WWF from. We should talk about the kind of, again, I'll use the word lore surrounding Hogan and Rude, right? Famously, they had a match where Rude hit Hogan over the head with a chair.
Boston Garden. It's a good match.
Boston Garden, yeah, and
January 3rd, 88, maybe.
Supposedly that kind of sealed the deal on Hogan seeing Warrior as someone that wasn't safe enough, whatever it may be. Now, there's been some pushback on that, and some folks have said that it's more just a case of, and to be fair, there is evidence of this. Hogan generally didn't work with, when he worked with Hennig, it allegedly didn't draw, right? Supposedly that's the claim. And I think there was a case of, Hogan just worked with the big men. That's what he did. I don't know. Again, that's all stuff that, we're certainly not getting the truth from Hulk Hogan, are we? So we're never going to know really where it started and when. But I think that was an issue for Rude. He leaves. I've seen it said that he left because he was not happy with the finish at SummerSlam, and I've also seen it said that it was the payoff. So, maybe both, right? I don't know. He was supposed to work with the Big Boss Man. He ultimately would in WCW. But that was supposed to be the next program where Heenan said things about Boss Man's mama or whatever the hell, and that was going to be the next feud, but Rude is gone instead, and he wraps up in October 90, closing his run with a Boss Man house show match.
Reminds me of the Coliseum video that's on Peacock in the network of Bobby Heenan and Boss Man in a match, and Heenan's like, "Boss Man, I've got your mother on the phone. I've got your mother on the phone right now. You can talk to her. I called her on the phone. I apologize."
That's incredible.
It's fucking awesome.
Tremendous stuff. We'll circle back to the Boss Man, Rick Rude dynamic very briefly later. But before we move on, other WWF matches we'd like to call out, fellas. Ravishing, Rick Rude. Anything come to mind straight away?
I was trying to remember who he wrestled at WrestleMania 6, the 15-match card from the Sky Dome. He squashed Jimmy Snuka.
Wasn't it?
Yeah.
Snuka. He squashed him? My God.
That was the lead-in to Warrior and Hogan. I like the cage match. I specifically like the hilarity of the finish where Warrior's out, but then he stops to do the hip swivel and Rude's in the ring and sells it But Rick Rude, I always think of Survivor Series, man, because those 3 years in a row, he would always head up a team, or he was part of the big team, and it's like we did an episode on the Briscoe brothers, and I'm thinking in the sense of the era Rick Rude came from is not an era where work rate was a thing. And that's something we always think about when we talk about these. We picked a good lineup of matches here, and there's plenty of matches that are memorable of his, from that era. But, recommending it to someone who's just watches wrestling through modern lenses, they may not see kind of what all is there.
Which briefly, because obviously we have more matches to discuss, it opens up an interesting conversation about how flawed, and Oracle, we've had a lot of conversations about this, how flawed kind of just comparing match catalog to match catalog can be.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that if Ravishing Rick Rude, as he was in those matches we just covered, existed today, he would regularly be called upon to have a 15, 20-minute TV main event, right, with another star. That wasn't wrestling then. So it's like you can't just like click salt on Cage and go, huh?
Even you look at like the way that like psychology and stuff worked back then. Like, Rude and Jake have a famous feud, great angle with Rude wearing Cheryl Roberts on his crotch and all that stuff. But their matches are not that good, right?
Yeah.
But their whole like, but there's also something good about those matches. The whole match is like based around like who's going to hit the Rude Awakening, who's going to hit
the build.
DDP,
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a Steamboat match from MSG that I've seen that I remember liking a lot. I actually think it's one of those like December 26th house shows at the Garden. I'm not sure which year. And we almost had an Orndorff match from the Garden.
With
so
Steamboat?
Again, like
you said with Steamboat?
Yeah.
That would be almost certainly 87.
It'd have to be, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Orndorff from the Garden too. So again, this kind of captures what we're discussing here in terms of like the Garden, that was where we got that stuff on tape because the MSG Network stuff, right? So you kind of wonder about these matches that are out there that happened and, just one night in Houston or whatever. It's interesting.
The most insane one is I don't think Rick Rude and Randy Savage had a single match in the WWF.
Wow, could you imagine how money that program would have been?
Nuts.
Yeah.
The problem is, like Cheryl Roberts, they would have made Elizabeth part of it. I'm gonna fucking kill you, like Randy. Friendly to that. Before we move on to our next act, Joe, if you don't mind, just go through a few quick things here,
please.
So we stay in line. One piece of lore that, speaking of Randy Savage, there's some story about, I don't know what fucking town they were working, Greensboro or some shit, but it was some NWA town, and it's when Savage was on top as the babyface champion, and he had asked Rude and Dynamite Kid to have his back that weekend, just wherever they went, and so, yeah, Tommy, Rick, come over here, I gotta talk to you, just the idea of that. But to keep in history here, I mentioned the wrestling figure thing. This may blow a lot of minds. Until 2007, Rick Rude only had 2 official wrestling figures. And one of them was his, of course, black card LJN, which I at one of the WrestleCons the past few years, I remember there was a figure booth that had it, and I was just like, can I just look at it? Because it was like $1,000. But and then of course it's Hasbro. So Rick Rude has had many figures since. We'll circle back to that. But then on the video game front, he was not in WrestleMania. We've talked about that before. Bam Bam Bigelow I remember talking about that. So even before WrestleMania on the Nintendo Entertainment System, the WWF had a video game that was on like PC and the Atari and Commodore. It was a floppy disk game. I've never even seen gameplay of it. I've just seen screenshots. It was called Micro League Wrestling, and it was the first licensed WWF video game of any sort. It was a turn-based game. The original release contained a floppy disk, which allowed you to participate in Hulk Hogan versus Randy Savage or Hulk Hogan versus Paul Orndorff. In 1988, 2 expansions were released. The first featured Savage versus Honky Tonk Man and Hacksaw Jim Duggan versus King Harley Race, while the others contained Hulk Hogan versus Ted DiBiase and Jake Roberts versus Rick Rude. Now, this is where things get really fascinating when you think of, all right, put yourself at your Atari in 1988. The game also featured pre-match promos with Gene Okerlund interviewing the combatants of the match, as well as in-match commentary conducted by a combination, depending on which version of the game you were playing, of Vince McMahon, Jesse Ventura, Bruno Sammartino, Gorilla Monsoon, and Bobby the Brain Heenan. So that's a very, very interesting just like blip, because like I said, I've never seen it in person, never seen actual gameplay, just screenshots. What I have seen was from 1990, the WWF WrestleMania Challenge. That was on the NES. I played that a lot. That was like a very late 80s lineup. Warrior, Hogan, Savage, Andre, Hacksaw, Big Boss Man, Rick Rude, and Brutus Barber Beefcake. The main thing I remember about that game as a kid was every wrestler had an 8-bit version of their theme song. So Rick Rude had the you know. So we'll circle back to the video game and action figure front, but just wanted to keep it in line with our acts here.
Beautiful. And I can't find a good photo of it, but the Hasbro, but this is the LJM, which is famous, I've learned recently, Alex, because of kids. It was not a very popular figure because you couldn't do anything with him because of where his hands were. He's kind of holding his tights. So he's kind of immobile. His arms can't do anything here.
Yeah, there were only a few LJNs that I really ever played with because of that reason. Like the Savage was good because you could do the elbow, but he this Black Card series, I think those were the ones that were only released in Canada at the time. They didn't even come to the States.
Yes.
And then they had an alternate attire where he was going to be wearing green tights that they were prototype figures of that never came out. Zack Ryder probably owns it, but
almost certainly. That's not like I only learned recently that's not like a bit either. He has like every prototype, which is unhinged.
He spent $42,000 on a Greg Valentine prototype, and like that's like a down payment on a home. And so the fact that he has the money to do that with makes me very angry.
Well, I'm fascinated by that like mentality of. I mean, I'm kind of thankful I don't have this mentality, but to me, that's not like I don't get the prototype fascination at all. You know, like I'm not a completionist in general. Like I'm thankful I'm not. I can just pick and choose the stuff I want. But even if I was, I feel like I wouldn't be worried about prototypes. I don't know, man.
No, it's like the beta versions of like movies and shit, or like I did for a very brief window. I started buying screeners, of like for your consideration movies, and I was like, what the fuck am I doing?
Bless.
Yeah, so.
That's tremendous. But yes, okay, I've got the Hasbro here. But we're going to look in a second of, what Rude did in... This always is interesting to me. It's like, there's a year where he just doesn't really do anything at all. He does like a handful of dates.
He tried to work the UWF.
But I'd like to know more, because there's a few things I'll highlight them. But firstly, there's the... There it is. Look at that. Look at the Rude Awakening headlock deal there at the bottom.
Hell yeah.
Yes.
What'd you say?
Brother?
Bro.
Did you just show something? Sorry, I was looking
Yes. Yes, I showed this Hasbro figure. You're fine.
Oh, yeah. Because that's literally what I was about to look up was the Hasbro figure. That's why I awkwardly stopped you, because I was like, wait a minute, did he just show it? And I was just about to look it up.
Brother.
So, Ruse 91. There's two matches that are... So... He wrestled Porndorf on like an independent show, and he also wrestled the Honky Tonk Man. Now, as Andrew mentions, this is infamous because for a long time it was suggested it didn't actually happen, but apparently the footage has emerged and is like hidden behind like some streaming service, because there's a YouTube video that's like, here's the match they said didn't happen, and it shows you like a clip of it, and it's like sign up for wrestling,
like at an indie.
Yeah, just as a one-off, like a spot show.
Wow.
Which is, but then, like, I guess Rick would be the babyface there, right? Which is even more incredible. So these are two just random dates he made in 1991 before heading to WCW. He also, we have to discuss this, he also worked a tour for All Japan Pro Wrestling, in which he teamed with the Miracle Violence Connection opposite Kikuchi, Kawada, and Masawa.
Let's fucking go.
A real match that happened. It isn't nearly as awesome as it sounds, but it is pretty good, and Rude is fascinating in Japan, as we'll get to later. Before we get to WCW, is there anything else we know about 91 like that we must discuss? Because this is always fascinating. He just kind of like hangs around and waits for the opening.
No, just like I mentioned, I know he tried to work for Herb Abrams, but I think getting out of his WWF contract proved difficult.
Yes. Okay, so he normally turns up at Havoc 91 as
Howling Phantom.
Yes, the Phantom. And and he has the reveal with Paul Lee and Medusa and all that, and he has that line very early in his run that will always stick with me of he's talking about Sting, and he says, "You look a lot bigger on TV." Rude has bulked up some, and I think he makes a very clear decision. I am not here to be a selfless bumping mid-card heel. I'm here to be a top guy, and I'm going to beat the shit out of the babyfaces who disagree with that assessment. Like, don't get me wrong, he still takes some great bumps, but he is aggressive, straight ahead, and nasty in WCW, as Alex mentioned earlier. He turns up at Havoc 91, and 2 months later, he's the top heel in the company. When Luger leaves, he's the top heel in the company, right?
Yeah.
So, and Luger's hardly around by that point. So, he gets a huge push. He wins the US title from Sting at the Clash of Champions, which we covered on the Sting episode, I'm pretty sure, right? The sprint. And of course, he is the centerpiece of the Dangerous Alliance, which is a faction that has become a big, something people regularly cite as like the most talented group and so on and so forth. It's something that regularly gets celebrated, thankfully. Probably at this point, honestly, gets celebrated pretty more than the run actually was, because it's just a few great peters. Then afterwards,
Stay tuned, folks. Stay tuned, folks, for
some
Dangerous Alliance enjoyment, if you get my drift, Joe.
I like it. I like it a lot. All right. We land on May 30th, 92, WCW Worldwide. It was taped on May 1st. This is the Super Nintendo Top 10 Challenge Final. WCW Worldwide. Dustin Rhodes, Ravishing Rick Rude. I'll do it now because it's the obligatory comment to make at this moment in time. Dustin Rhodes has had legitimately good matches this year. Dude, incredible. This match rocks, is like a personal favorite of mine. It's especially one I hold dear because these two work consistently in 93, and those matches are not really very good, unfortunately. So I kind of cherish this even more because it's awesome. Hell of a time, Alex. I don't think you'd seen this before. I think you mentioned, right? What did you make of it, brother?
I had not seen this, no. I was just sorry, I got sidetracked here looking it up. I was trying to confirm. Rick Rude did wrestle on the house show WCW ran at the Sportatorium in 1992. That's a show that's always fascinated me. Like there's got to be like footage of that somewhere. But anyway, I had not seen this. A lot of the worldwide stuff, because I watched Saturday Night as a kid, but like worldwide, as we've talked about, like even up until our Savage episode, like Savage versus Ultimo Dragon, and what's the Kaz Hayashi and Raven. Like there's all these matches that happen in the lore of worldwide that are like always new to me. And so this is an example of it. I did write down, it used to be better Super Nintendo Top 10 Challenge Tournament. I was so happy about that. Now we're not quite yet. Sadly for you, Joe, we don't get it on this episode. We're not at the Simply Ravishing theme. We're still like in the Dangerous Alliance theme here. Look, we did a whole episode on Dustin Rhodes. It is so funny to me that at one point in time people were like, he's okay because he was Dusty Rhodes' son, that people were like, yeah, he's all right. Like you watch this and he didn't need to be doing like the inside out clothesline sell and stuff like that. So there's stuff that if I wanted to, I could be like, yeah, this isn't good, but like crowds behind him, he gets him fucking clapping and going nuts for everything he does. He does the hip swivel at one point, to which Jesse massively body shames him and saying, well, he doesn't have the body to be doing that. It's kind of embarrassing. He takes, you want to talk about one of the more comedic moves in wrestling. And it's funny I say that because Rick Rude's known for comedically selling the atomic drop. Rude gives Dustin an inverted atomic drop in this that looks devastating. The way that like Dustin takes it and then falls to his back, and it's fantastic. Bill Alfonso presiding as referee, by the way.
Yes.
I was hoping, dare I say praying, that we'd have one match on here that had one of my favorite Rick Rude-isms where his back's worked over. So he tries to taunt by doing the swivel, but then he stops halfway through to grab his back to let us know that he's in bad shape. Jesse says on commentary, and I quote, I wrote this down, "What action we're seeing here from the Nintendo Top 10."
Which we should know is even funnier when you realize that Jesse like actively buries the step when he explains that like,
yes,
Rude is number one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's like, Rude has no reason to win.
I'll get to it later, but just Jesse bearing the whole thing and like trying to talk about the number one contendership, and Tony Schiavone doesn't know how to defend it.
I did gasp. I did one of these, like kind of recoiling at my screen. We get the tried and true WCW spot of a tombstone getting reversed, but Dustin doesn't waist lock him. He just wraps his arms pretty much around the back of Rude's knees before he drops him. That was pretty terrifying.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, to the things that someone at the time probably would have been like, you need to slow down, brother. We get this shot of Dustin just fucking firing off the ropes with this flying clothesline. And the way it's shot, he like flies into frame and knocks down Rude. Looks fantastic. And then, you know, we were talking about finishers earlier. I can believe there was a time when a bulldog was a finish, you know?
Hell yeah, brother.
And the people bite on it and go fucking nuts. And because the ref's distracted, Fonzie, shockers, and falling down on the job here.
To be fair, have you seen the blunt force trauma, brother? I mean,
he gets distracted by Medusa, and back to what I was talking about. I've said this every time we do WCW episodes. Their fans were just different. These two, like, not like grown men, but probably like mid-20s, like, you know, old enough to know what they're watching. They're both standing up and yelling at Fonzie to turn around because, you know, Rick Rude's pinned after the bulldog. They're like, ah! And very, very fun match. You know, this is would have been around the same time period from our last episode, or 2 episodes ago, excuse me, the Blondes against the Horsemen. You know, to think about the talent that was all on WCW television. Just, this isn't like a throwaway match necessarily, but you know what I mean? It's just like, let's put it on their syndicated show. It's insane to think about. Good stuff.
Yeah, very good. To your point, dude, there's so much of Dustin's game that's already like very much intact here and apparent. Like his punch, his timing, like the natural was a shoot, brother. Absolutely, it was. Bobby, before I pitch it to you, any clue on this like button business, brother?
Yeah, what you got to do? You got to smash that like button.
What did you make of this Super Nintendo Top 10 Challenge final, Bob?
I loved it. You know, you brought up the 1993 stuff. They wrestled for the U.S. title quite a bit, and it's fine. Like, you know, it's 2 guys we're like, you know, enjoy watching both of them and whatever. But yeah, this is like significantly better than any of that. And yeah, I mean, just for what it needed to be, like, you know, just TV main event or whatever, it's awesome. And you know, again, I'm glad that this match, because I didn't know about this match for today. So, you know, I've only seen the 93 stuff, and I'm glad that I've seen this one now as well, because like I said, it's a lot better.
This is also, and this was completely unintentional, but it's kind of like a good preview in a weird way of our next match, in that this is a match that's obviously called by Rude, like duh, like it has all the Rude spots, right? And Dustin's like a rookie. But what makes that, you know, important for what we're doing here is you then realize, because of that, how much of the Chono match, which we'll get to in a moment, is also like a Rude match, which makes it even more interesting because obviously it's in a very different spot, in a very different context. So we'll get back to that. But for now, Oracle, what did you make of this this TV match with Dustin, brother?
Yeah, so this is a one that was found, you know, or rediscovered, I suppose, or, you know, talked up big time 15 years ago now in the WCW Smart's Choice poll. I believe it ranked in the top 100 or, you know, close to it in there. Based. One of the matches that that got some votes. I believe I voted it in my top 100 somewhere in there. Just a great match. All the stuff on the low blows is awesome. There's a great spot where, like, I think it's either Rude or Dustin block a monkey flip.
It's Dustin goes for a monkey flip and Rude pushes him, and he takes this. Dustin takes this big booming bump. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Just really awesome stuff. Of course, you know, there's the distraction finish, and the crowd super. Dustin is just Dustin. By the end of 91, he's great. Like he's good and he's good at the end of 90 when he's in the Fed with Dusty, you know, for a cup of coffee. So like he's putting it all together in 92. He's awesome here. The line on commentary that I brought up earlier where Jesse was like, So, Dustin's a number 1 contender now. What was he before? Number 5 or 6? And Tony's like, I don't know. It's just,
dude, it's actually even funnier because Jesse says 9 or 10, and Tony goes, he's surely 5 or 6. I don't know. Don't ask me about these things. How did that stay? This is peak WCW in the sense that, like, this show aired 29 days after the match was taped, and they're like, that's fine, leave it in. Leave them in talking about it. This was taped commentary after the fact, dude. Couldn't they tell him where he was ranked?
They don't, it's WCW. They don't edit shit at all, They
don't care. No care.
In the can, take it, take it or leave it. But yeah, this is the epitome of a hidden gem. One of many that was discovered. I shouldn't say discovered because I say that from my perspective as someone who got on the internet in 08 or 09. So I'm sure the super nerds like us knew about it, in the 2000s, before that. But just a really awesome match that really kind of exemplifies the era of WCW at the time.
Yes.
Come on, fucking Nintendo Challenge Series. That's awesome. Why the fuck? Like, that's kick ass, dude.
Oh, yeah.
And even like more specifically within the world of WCW, it was nice to have a match that kind of captured the War Games season, right? Because this was taped before War Games, obviously aired off. But we didn't do Wrestle War 92, but that is really the centerpiece of Rude's WCW run.
For Wrestle War 92, folks.
Stay tuned, folks. Stay tuned. But
it wasn't Flair at Halloween Havoc 93.
I don't think so, mate. No, I don't think so. We'll have to cross that later on.
Not 93, 90. What am I thinking of?
You're right.
Oh, okay.
Rude Flair.
Yeah.
Yeah. Having 93. Yeah. Buffer in the building. Whole deal. Yeah.
That's the one with Vader and Cactus, right?
Yes.
All right. Peaks and valleys.
Yeah. Dude, that match, to be fair, well, I mean, I'll get ahead of myself, but to be fair, the Havoc match is considerably better than the Full Brawl match. So, it is what it is. These are the games we play, unfortunately.
What if it was like 37 minutes or something?
Yeah. Fuck.
Halloween Havoc 93. Here you go. I'll tie it back to present day so we can keep our present day fans alive. Halloween Havoc 93 happened to the UNO Lakefront Arena, which is where essentially the test drive for All Elite Wrestling happened with Ring of Honor Supercard of Honor 12 with the Kenny Omega Cody Rhodes match. And that's the show that made them think they could pull off All In. And that's where we are today,
Pretty cool, man. That's pretty awesome. I mentioned this being very obviously the Rude match. The most, Dustin doing the camel clutch and like swiveling his hips and then Rude turning into it so he like low blows him is like the most Rick Rude thing ever. He does this in like every match, I feel like, in WCW. This is no different.
Roddy going, that's a low blow, and Jesse goes, yeah, but Dustin initiated it.
The referee didn't see it. What are you gonna do?
We should say, like, Jesse's a big part of Rick's career, man. Like, for most of it, Jesse's there, like, singing his praise and getting, smashing him over as a heel. So that's important. We've all said it. I have to do it too. The Tombstone Reversal, the WCW spot, the Ultimate WCW spot, which is about to make its way over to Japan in the next match, which probably huge.
That's
Medusa's at ringside here. Great stuff.
That was one of Sting's big spots, like in his whole WCW run. And so, like, I associate that wholeheartedly with WCW.
It's what, because like every time they do it, the people explode.
Yeah.
I think the best one is in the aforementioned Iron Man with Steamboat, where Ricky, because he's Ricky Steamboat, the way he sells it, where he's like pushing on Rick's legs to try and get himself out. Oh my God, does it get any better? Tremendous. This rocks. The people are so mad at the finish. Godly. Tremendous piece of business. A personal favorite. I cannot believe we're still seeing Dustin have legitimately good TV matches 32 years later. Like, dude, come on, man. That's crazy. Now, the fact that there's been more good Dustin matches since we did the Grappler is like ridiculous. But nonetheless, and by the way, I have to say, fellas, this is a pretty brisk show for it. I'm looking at the length of this program. We're going along smoothly. And I think a lot of that is these matches they're not about intricate sequencing, are they? These are very much like meat and potatoes, which is, I think, is a part of Rude's legacy that is under discussed in terms of how much he would get from very little. You think about the great Rude moves. We've discussed a couple of outliers. Very much colors inside the lines for the most part, right? But does so to great effect.
We all packed a ham and cheese sandwich with a Capri Sun. We brought our toolboxes, and we're just getting to work here, boys.
Brother.
If I can take us off on a diversion here,
please do go for it.
You got me in a real perverted mood, so I was looking up his whole All Japan run, which one of the matches in that is Rude with Miracle Violence Connection against Sharudagun of Taue, Jumbo, and Mighty Inoue. Wow. So that sounds pretty fascinating. But anyway, where I found myself then was at the end of his WWF run, the touring house show main event never was on any televised show. They did one dark match at TV taping. It was Kerry Von Erich and the Ultimate Warrior against Mr. Perfect and Rick Rude, which that sounds a lot of fun to me. And I found that they headlined a show at the Maple Leaf Gardens with this match. And this seems like something Oracle and I would seek out and study like the Zapruder film. Also on that show was Marty Jannetty teaming with Shane Douglas to take on the Orient Express.
Oh, fuck yeah.
I got so excited when I read that. Like, that's ridiculous.
That is wild. My God.
Pat Tanaka and fucking Shane Douglas running the ropes and shit. Fuck yeah, dude.
What a hell of a match, to be honest with you. Tremendous stuff. Okay. With that, we head to our final match. Unfortunately, regrettably, our final match. Because we're having so much fun, and it's like, again, I wish there was more of Rick Rude. I wish the catalog was able to extend beyond his injuries later in '92. But we finish on what I don't think it's Rick Rude's best match. I think that's the Steamboat match. However, in some ways, I think this is his crown jewel in terms of what it says about him as a wrestler. In that your brain would not necessarily suggest that he was suited to a sumo hall thriller.
Yeah.
Epic, by the way. We should know. I mean, they put in a lot of time here. This is the G1 final. Rick Rude was the first guy. It's only the second official G1 before it had different names. But Rick Rude was the first and only Gaijin to be in a G1 final until 2012 when the Machine Gun Carl Anderson would become the second.
Really?
No. Yeah. So
wow.
The reason it was a big, as much as it's become a meme like G1 final, the reason it was a really big deal at the time was because Rick Rude is the only Gaijin to have done that to that point. Like, there's 20-year gap, which is crazy to think about.
Okay, so yeah, help me out with the timeline here, because the history of the G1 goes back to like Inoki's day, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's like MSG. There's a whole bunch of sort of names for it. Yeah.
It used to be called, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the Grand Prix at one point.
Yeah, it changes.
That's like
it becomes. Go for it.
So they had.
Because this is actually very complicated.
Started in the 70s, right? I think it started.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
and it was the Grand Prix for a long time in the 80s. There was a famous final with Hogan and Inoki in '84.
Inoki.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Then it became the G1, I think, in '91, maybe.
'91. Yeah, because this is the second one. This is also not the G1 as we would come to know, which makes Cole Anderson's achievement more impressive, obviously. Because this tournament was single elimination and was for the NWA strap, right? I'm not mistaken. This is when they're like still trying to. So, to give you guys an idea of this tournament, if you're unaware, this tournament featured the following first round matchups: Arn Anderson versus Steve Austin, Barry Windham versus Keiji Muto, Bam Bam Bigelow, Scott Norton, Kensuke Sasaki versus Jim Neidhart. My favorite, this one made me laugh out loud, Hiroshi Hase versus Terry Taylor. And in the one that I will absolutely be finding the footage of, Shinya Hashimoto versus the Barbarian.
My God.
Yes, seriously. Rude worked Super Strong Machine in round one, and then Hashimoto in the second round, and then the semifinals, Kensuke Sasaki. This all took place within a single week, and Rude worked like August 10th, August 11th, August 12th. That's like the end of this tournament. So this was a shift, dude.
This was I always get the timelines confused, but this was the answer to the Champions Carnival, right? Like the All Japan tournament they did. This was their version of it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now this is, to me anyway, like this match is etched in my memory. It has issues, I think, but the vibes and the visuals of this are like fascinating to me in so many ways. Firstly, you have Medusa, who Sumo Hall cheers after booing Rick Rude, which is like wild because I don't know if they'd like played this up on the tour. I don't know. It's just wild, right? All of this is weird. Dusty and Bill Watts are in the crowd watching, and you can see them the whole time because they're in the hard camera. Dusty's locked in too, dude.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Looks like me watching Solo on a Grin along. Just immaculate vibes. And also, I truly believe this, one of the all-time great wrestling crowd. This crowd is absurd.
Yes.
And finally, and I'm around it, finally, Rick Rude is full Rick Rude here. This is very important. There's one change he makes we'll discuss later, but this has a similar novelty to the Savage Tenryu match, where it's like, oh my god, it's actually Randy Savage in the Tokyo. I mean, this is not Tokyo. My point is, seeing him be the most like US, centric wrestler imaginable, and it worked this well in Tokyo, says so much about his ability and so much about his versatility. So I haven't even talked about the match, but there's so much here going on. Fascinating piece of business. Alex, take it away. G1 final. Chono, Rude, go for it.
My first note is just all caps sports presentation because it's the king of sports here. It is weird. It's like I started laughing out loud within the first 5 minutes of this. Just the structure based on everything else we'd watched up until this point. It was, we just 2 stanzas ago we're doing 80s WWF, and it's here we are now with Rick Rude, trying to headstand out of a fucking leg scissors. It's like, here we go, baby. So yeah, really good stare down and slap to start us off, so we know that Rude's the bad guy. And the thing I always remember from this match is Chono doing the hip swivel, because that just tickles me so deeply. Where he throws him out and hey. Dusty and Bill Watts, like you said, are ringside. Bill Watts is watching with the intensity of someone who has like 150 grand riding on this match. Like his gaze does not break the ring the entire time. Yeah, hilarious structure comparatively. They do show Inoki, who looks bored in the crowd, but that's pretty much Antonio anytime he was anywhere. Love, there's this part where Chono's going for an arm bar, and Rude stacks him up and starts doing this like windmill with his arm. Like, it's this weird hybrid of 80s style WWF selling, the whole Aloha like sunset flip sell, but also mixed with like, oh, I'm like in a real shoot hold. So it's a straight, like we joke about all the time. It's obviously, it was way more pronounced back in these days of the American workers having to adjust to like the shoot style, brother, when they went over to Japan. And so watching Rude try to incorporate that into what he does is really, and it works too, and he had several pile drivers on Chono. You said this was Sumo Hall?
Yeah.
Is that where WWF had the house show that was on the network years ago?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
okay.
Sir. And Rude does a missile dropkick here, so we know he's there to play. We get the tombstone reversal. The closing stretch is exciting, but when we get basically into the third act of this match, there's a lot of communication that is like very apparent between the two here. And that's fine because they end up getting it back on track, brother. And the crowd, dude, the second to last STF, or maybe the last STF, they do this wide shot of the crowd and like they rise in unison. Like they can't believe what's happening. Like, he's going to do it. There's the commentators, the G1 Climax at one point, which I thought was pretty good. We get a miscue at one point, but because of the way they're like recklessly swinging at each other, it's something, because I'm a fucking nerd and I've watched countless hours of this stuff, that I could see like, oh, they missed what they were doing, but they still pull it back together. Rude breaks out the knee drop off the top rope for one, which is always really awesome. The STF, my note is the STF is hot, brother. When that doesn't work, Chono dips into the bag of tricks that his mentor taught him, and he tries the enziguri, and Rude kicks out of that, and the crowd is flabbergasted at this notion. Very simple finish, but very creative, ingenious, dare I say. Rude trying to buy himself some time, pulls Chono and throws him to the outside, which the crowd boos hilariously. But Chono gets right back up, top rope, shoulder block off the top rope, catches Rude by surprise, 1, 2, 3. I'd seen this before. I know like the legend behind this. I also know it's a fascinating dichotomy because their other match that year won worst match of the year in the Observer. So that's always kind of the funny give and take. And I think Dave gave this like 4.5 stars in a time when that like really meant something. And it's very entertaining. I agree with you, Joe. If someone said, show me your favorite Rick Rude match, I don't know if it's this, but it's a hell of a piece of business. It gets that emotion that you always want when you watch the classic Japanese wrestling. And I think he's like the feather in the cap that Rick Rude has that I can't remember if we were on air or off air. We're talking about this, Joe, but like they're not revisionist history, but there's this approach that some people have now to saying that Rick Rude was the best wrestler in the world in 1992. And I think having this match adds to the case that you can make for that. And it seems like we do this all the time when we talk about Japanese wrestling in whatever era we're in. But you think about like this is happening there while they're still doing Randy Savage versus the Ultimate Warrior in the WWF. It's fascinating to compare like the timetables, whatnot. But this is also when Brett's on the way up. So 92 in general is a really interesting year in wrestling. But back to our subject du jour. This is this is the match that like people talk about when they talk about Rick Rude as like a worker.
Yeah, it shows the depth to him, right? That I think without this, you wouldn't have something to point to, which is ironic because in a lot of ways, a lot of this, as I mentioned earlier, is a Rick Rude match, but the setting and the length and the opponent gives it this kind of these dimensions that you wouldn't associate with him.
It's funny. It's like the Andre thing with the Hansen and Inoki matches that we've covered on here before. And like Savage is a bit different, but people do always point to the Tenryu match, Hogan with Inoki and Hansen. Like people, they've tried to make the case from these great wrestlers of the big, loud WWF days of like, see, this is how they were good workers because they went to Japan and did this shit.
Exactly, yeah. Which, I mean, we have our fun with that. But I think in this case, you can see why. You mentioned the one kick out on the knee drop. So this is something that I read years ago, and I confirmed today. For whatever reason, that was his finish, like, on this tour. So the reason they go absolutely, especially crazy, is he'd been beating guys with the knee drop. And I guess because it wasn't like his actual finish, he was even more happy to burn it. Like, yeah, sure, kick out one, I guess. But he didn't use Rude Awakening as a finish in Japan. Interestingly enough. I don't know why. Maybe someone told him, like, he needed something more impressive or strike. I have no idea. But
something more fighting spirit.
Yeah, I guess so. If you want, yeah. So that's an interesting thing. But Bobby, had you seen this before, and what did you think of it, mate?
I had not seen it before. You guys did a really good job setting the stage there. The presentation rules. I think both guys worked tremendously hard. It's an interesting point about like, is it the best Rick Rude match? Because like you've obviously seen more of them than I have. I liked it a lot, but again, it didn't really have what like the Piper match had or even the Warrior match had as far as, I don't know if that's just like a familiarity thing with me or just a style thing, but like, it's good. It's very good. It's historically important. I think they work hard. Like I said, the presentation adds to it quite a bit, but like, I don't know, like there's something missing. I don't know quite what.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I have mixed opinions on it. Oracle, it's a weird one for me because I have attached to it. Oracle, what did you think of this?
Yeah, I liked this quite a bit. I thought it was a great match. I'd never seen it before.
Wow.
I really like the thing that always stands out to me is someone who kind of appreciates when wrestling production is done really well. The way they like the sweeping shots of Sumo Hall during like after big near falls were incredible. Like I don't know, because I don't, particularly in the 90s, I don't have a familiarity, though in the 80s I do. This match alone has better production than anything from All Japan in the 90s, in my opinion. Just in terms of like,
I probably agree. Yeah, and I'm not an expert.
Things of that nature. And again, I'm not an expert, but I just it struck out to me. Or rather, it stuck out to me. They work kind of the typical style of working holds, do a really good job working through the holds. Chono doing the swivel is always awesome, as Alex mentioned. I love that, like, even though it was like kind of a flub there in the match. I love the spot where they kept like getting like their wires crossed.
Yeah.
And ended up running with ended up with the mafia kick, whatever. That I actually thought that was really well done, even though it seemed like it was like an actual miscommunication error. Because the crowd were so into it that they bought, they bought it.
Mm-hmm.
The finish is awesome because Chono's like reaction at the finish and this massive pop, and he's almost stunned that he won, which I always love. And then I totally didn't realize it, but he gets, he fucking wears the big gold. He gets the big gold strap.
Yes, sir.
Which is a huge pop. I'd forgotten that he held the big gold there for a little bit.
Yeah, which becomes relevant in Rude's story, right? Which we'll get to in a moment here. This match is interesting for me, and like I will always love it because a lot of the reasons I love it are actually beyond the match itself, and Oracle just kind of mapped them out. And Alex, you spoke to him too. Like the way this looks, the way this sounds, the way this feels is like kind of intoxicating. I think like it's hard not to. Every time I go back to it, I'm like, oh my god, this is just beautiful.
Yeah.
When I first watched it, it blew my mind, and I thought it was like one of the greatest matches I've ever seen. This is many years ago. Every time I rewatch it, like I think, man, I love Rick Rude clearly, but he did love himself a camel clutch chin lock, didn't he? Good God, brother. He would sit in there, he'd read a newspaper. He was, and
check
that
out the
is an
Observer.
issue here. Yeah, that is an issue here. They do sit there for a while. I do think the middle part of the match is drags a little bit. To be honest, I always feel that when I rewatch it. The start of the match is electric. Rude doing a flare flop is wild, by the way. Like that feels interesting in a range of ways. Rude's selling in 1992 is like the gold standard to me of a heel selling. I mean, in the last match we did, he takes the bionic elbow and does this like incredible comedic sell. But then, as Alex mentioned, he can equally do these like believable body pops. I mean, he's just unbelievable.
Dueling a comic drop sell where he's like, like a cartoon character, like Bugs Bunny. Yeah.
Dueling superplexes, the tombstone reversal here in Sumo Hall. The place is just rumbling. All-time great crowd, all-time great feel for a match. And I think the match is great. I think it has bloat at this length, and kind of some padding. But man, I just think it says so much about how great he was that this is like what he produced on like his second real tour of Japan. He has this match. Like, dude, nowadays it's less so. But back then, it was a real thing, the adjustment working in front of these crowds. Like, that was not an easy thing to do. Him doing it to this level is just spectacular. And I think that's why it's an important thing to include here, even if I much prefer the Steamboat match. Great match, I still think. And Chono on the Grin Grappler archives too, which is fun. So
you check out the rest of this card.
Yes, mate. We got Steiner, bro.
Yeah, I was about to say multiple Dave ratings on here. Steiner's against Muto and Sasaki, and then may have to put this in a playlist for a future Grin Along. Bam Bam Bigelow, Scott Norton, and Tony Holm, also known as Ludwig Borga, against Barry Windham, Jim Neidhart, and the Barbarian. In 1992, David gave it 3.5.
There's another match on here that's recommended that you've not brought up, and I want to congratulate you on your restraint and say well done, Contrarian Alex, because that was real progression. When you said look at the card, I thought, but you did it. Well done.
It's a holiday season. I'm trying to behave myself,
Fabulous. I love to see it. Okay, so as you mentioned, Alex, famously, this pairing would have an, wretched Halloween Havoc rematch that is an absolute slog. There are two theories about that match.
I've never seen it. Okay, yeah.
Okay, now go for it. What was you going to say?
No. I was saying I've never seen it. What's the deal? And I was going, what's the deal? And you're picking up where I'm going. Yeah.
Was that Lee Marshall? For a second, sound like Lee Marshall.
That was Jerry Seinfeld. Lee Marshall had been like, "Well, Tony, I've got a girl on my cock here."
There are two theories. One of which is, and this is absolutely the truth, both guys were beat up. Rude's injury, the situation's starting to add up where Rude is slowing down, and that's about to take him out of Starrcade. It's very soon after this, obviously. Chono is on the heels of the Austin match where Austin dumps on his head. So they're both beat up, right? The other more sexy and WCW story is that Bill Watts told them to there's this whole law that Bill Watts told them to rein it in, brother, and not have one of those matches. Which is layered, and it also makes you reconsider entirely how we think Bill Watts watched the last match. Did he just sit there the whole time thinking it sucked? I don't know. I have no clue. There's a story about he didn't want him to show up the American. I have no idea, man. It's so weird. That match is really, 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 really boring. Either way, Rude is hurt. Go on, Alex. What was you gonna say? Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say that it's funny because that's the show that Ron Simmons was champion during, and he wrestles the Barbarian. It's this awesome 9 or 10 minute match.
Yeah, that's the program where Cactus Jack trains the Barbarian.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you know who almost was in that role? There's some incredible wrestling trivia. There was someone they talked to about coming in as manager. Bob, you may know this. This is right up your alley.
Yeah, who is it?
Bruce Pritchard. Bruce Pritchard was almost brought in to be the manager. Opposite Ron Simmons. Yep.
That is outstanding.
So he gets hurt. He misses Starrcade 92 where he was supposed to work with Simmons, right? Ron Simmons. And instead they do the Dr. Death thing where they look a double count out or whatever. He returns in March 93, but sadly is never really the same. His 93 is very disappointing. He has the aforementioned Dustin Rhodes program, which includes an Iron Man 1 year after the Steamboat match, and it falls a distance short, unfortunately.
It's okay, but it's
it's just,
the boss match is good.
Yes, we'll get there. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Far worse than the Dustin feud is the Ric Flair feud, which is often cited as an all-time example of guys not gelling.
Yeah.
It's definitely that, but I also think it's a really, it's a rough time for them to meet because Flair isn't back in rhythm yet. He's doing the weird confidence crisis, part of his life. And also, Rude just ain't the same, man.
It's before, Flair's return to being Flair came with that Starrcade match with Vader, and these matches were before that, correct?
Yeah. Yes, and in the Vader match, there's that moment Flair always talks about where Harley fires him up at ringside. Have you heard this story? Flair was selling, and Harley allegedly was you're embarrassing me, kid. Come on, and Flair
embarrassing me,
like Mickey's wanting a Rocky, So yeah, it's a shame. I'd love to have seen 92 Rude work with any version of Flair, really, but ideally one a little bit younger, maybe, or older, and Rude could have talked about his physique the whole time. Either way,
yeah.
But that deal sucks. I agree with Oracle. I also like the Boss Man match. Now, he was supposed to work with Davey Boy at that Starrcade, and Davey Boy leaves the territory.
Oh, and Mr. Rude,
indeed, and Big Bubba comes in as the boss, right? Which is an infamous WCW gimmick deal there, the boss. And at one point, Tony literally says, "The Big Boss Man." He literally says that, right? And they recently made a Mattel figure of that run, which is godly. And that match is fun. We should know he leaves the Flair feud with the Big Gold, right? He's the international world champion. He often is credited as a world champion, which I think is a little bit generous, but nonetheless. He drops the belt to Hiroshi Hase at some point, gets it back. He's working in Japan with Sting, and then the injury happens that was like the one that's, it officially ended his career.
One of the more visually
yeah,
unsettling injuries in wrestling.
100%. It's also a real bummer, for a range of reasons, but he was in the midst of a babyface turn, which Oracle, like you've talked about Oracle right before with me, like he was going to work with Vader as a babyface, dude. That's fascinating. Like,
and he cut that amazing promo on Saturday night where he's like,
yes,
I'm gonna fucking kill you, Vader.
It rules.
That's when he stormed the ring with the chair and just beat the fuck out of Leon with it. Yeah.
I wish, even though he's physically beat up, I wish we could have seen what that would look like. How the crowd would have taken to it. It's such a shame. Now, as you mentioned, Alex, the back injury from Japan, that is a famous clip, and it is. I mean, obviously, it's very apparent that he's like badly hurt by that, because of course he would be. Look at it.
Yeah.
I only learned a couple years ago that there was some theories, some conspiracies. Bob, don't get too excited about that retirement, because as we know, we had some fun about it earlier, but the Lloyds of London thing was very real at the time.
Yeah,
and there are some theories that Rick was kind of surveying the scene, saw that Brother Terry was coming in on one side, realized how Vince saw him on the other side, and said, maybe it's about time. Maybe it's about time we start cashing them insurance checks and stop making town. Now, I don't know. Again, he obviously was beat up. We just discussed the last year and a half of his career. He's basically he's so injured, so beat up.
And it's worth calling out too. I mean, I'm sure he worked hard and was in the gym every day, and he ate his egg whites and his chicken breasts. But from that era, you can only do the level of steroids those guys were doing before things start to really give. Like, that's the thing with Hogan. Rude kept that physique.
Yeah.
We joke about Hogan all the time. By the time fucking the end of 92, Hogan, when he gets to WCW, looks like the fucking Walmart brand version of Hulk Hogan from 1989.
That was the tough one with the Ravishing gimmick, right? He had to be that guy. It's tough. I mentioned this before. It pops me huge. In the Observer, it was said that at one point the original Hulk Hogan debut was he and Flair versus Hennig and Rude. This breaks my brain. I'll bring it up whenever I can. Obviously, Hennig didn't even come in then. Rude isn't around by the time he gets there. There's so much just weirdness to that. As a fan, I always think it's a shame that I think he would have been much more suited to the WWF that arrives after he leaves, ironically. I mean, you look at when Bret Hart's the top babyface, could you imagine the matches they would have had in 91, 92?
No,
and they were close friends too. When the main event scene begins to get smaller, he's not there. But if he was there, he'd have been right on top, I feel like. And it's just, it's the way it worked out. We got the WCW run.
And Bret was pretty close to jumping in 92.
Yeah. That's the other part.
That's
fascinating.
One of the Bret story that's always told. And I love Bret. Bret's my hero, my favorite wrestler, etc., etc. Me and FTR Bald got that in common, but that's my favorite part of that Bret story is never mentioned. How he basically leveraged being the IC champion and threatened to go to WCW with it.
Yeah.
Because I'm sorry, Joe, I'm taking your show.
No, go for it, please.
He is the only guy missing from the 92 Rumble. If you had Bret Hart in that match, everyone from that era is in that match. And Bret's gone. And it's well, where was he? Oh, yeah, he was going to jump to WCW.
Dude, if he jumps, he's in the Dangerous Alliance feud. The babyface side, he's in Nikita's spot, right? Because the rest of those guys would already be there. So
Stunning Steve and Bret Hart, 1992, with the WCW ramp that stays even going into the ring.
Yes, fascinating. This was one, again, we have our fun with Sean. Imagine that, Sean working with Rude in the early 90s. There's so much stuff that,
you cannot tell me that Rick Rude in 95 wouldn't have gotten better matches out of Diesel than fucking Davey Boy Smith and Psycho Sid on those In Your House pay-per-views.
Yeah, I do wonder if I wonder what the temperature was with Rude in the WWF, because obviously eventually he does emerge as a manager, but he was part of the steroid trial and all of that. But then Vince would, a lot of guys would return, right? That Vince had issues with, so I have no idea. This is a fascinating kind of bunch of what ifs that come with this, but nonetheless, 1994, his in-ring career is over mid-94. do we know anything about he's like 95, 96? Because like he reemerges as a manager in 97 and is everywhere for a minute, but do we know anything about him? He just disappears right after he retires for a bit. I think so. I could be wrong.
I think he's one of those guys that had like a tragic end, but had like a successful. He might have been married twice, but his second one that he had kids with was like a successful marriage, and like he had a successful family, which I don't know if y'all are history buffs, but that's pretty rare for the pro wrestling industry.
It is, yeah. I think his first marriage ended like pretty much at the start of his wrestling career. It's like, for most of his pro wrestling career, you're correct. And he's kind of famous for, like, Brett would always talk about he would tape over his wedding ring, right? I think as Brett said in his book. So he reemerges in ECW. Then he's in the WWF with DX, which is like an all-time funny just thing to ponder. They recently made a Mattel Elite of that also, I think. Or at least it was a Build-A-Figure, I think. Build-A-Figure.
I hate that shit, man. Yeah, that Build-A-Figure stuff, yeah.
It's very corny. But at least in a case like that, it's like probably no one would buy that figure other than you and I, Alex, so I get it. But,
it's true, yeah.
And then
his ECW run,
yes, go for it.
He is cited, he was advertised for a match, and he may have done like a working punch or something, but I know like the whole, like I was talking about earlier, the whole deal was he could never like get physical, but like I think it had to have been 97. Heatwave would have been the only, well, he was on Barely Legal. That was like, he was a big part of the angle there where Oracle, do you remember they tried to make people believe that Brian Lee was Rick Rude because he wore the Simply Ravishing, even though Brian Lee was like a foot taller than Rick Rude. So he was there, and I think they billed him for a match, but then of course it didn't happen. And he was basically, unless I'm forgetting anything, Oracle, his whole run in ECW, he did commentary, and as far as like storyline went, it was he was trying to at first like strengthen the triple threat, but then he turned on Shane, and he's the reason Bam Bam Bigelow left the triple threat to beat Shane Douglas for the ECW title. I'll let you get to the WWF, Joe, but the one thing people forget about the story of he was on Raw and Nitro the same night. That same week, he did an ECW shot.
Yep.
Yeah. He's on all three TVs. The DX thing is interesting because like it's mentioned in the chat. I don't have an ad set it, and it is a brief run, but it's like it's kind of like not a thing that's ever discussed. Like it's pretty fascinating that he's just part of that act. And isn't there there's some tales that he wasn't particularly keen on those gentlemen? So I mean, obviously he had his allegiances to the Hitman. Bob, what do we know about that, Bobby? Because I'm not too familiar.
Yeah, I don't think they really got along very well. So it was kind of a weird pairing. And, obviously once the screw job went down, didn't stop Rude from leaving. He didn't care about his spot that much. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think a ton of people got along with Triple H and Shawn Michaels back then. So it wouldn't surprise me if Rude didn't as well.
Was there something when Pillman passed where they didn't want to be part of the Tim Bell, and I think he felt some type of that.
Yes. I believe that's
right. They're the only ones that weren't on the stage for that. Yeah.
And Rude is there, right? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rude Pillman's very, very good. Yeah. That's we'll circle back to Act 3 because the recommendation that will certainly be in there. Good call, Oracle. But the last cool thing that Rick Rude does is, as Bob mentioned, Montreal, where he's one of the guys who protects Brett. He's ensures nothing happens to Brett, and then he leaves with Brett. I always loved the story. He and Bischoff had a very complicated relationship by all counts, including, I should go back to it, Ben brought up in the chat earlier, there's that famous story where he had to give up the belt, and he said, come take it out of the trunk, and Bischoff came over and there was a gun next to the belt to scare Bischoff. Very serious, very, very serious cat. And,
Joe, show that picture I sent of Rick Rude and Vader to the group chat earlier, just in case in the off chance no one's ever seen this. It's one of the greatest pictures of wrestlers together ever. It's
maybe the most wrestling image of all time, right? Maybe. While I do this here, but yeah, it's the Montreal thing is cool. Brett thought the world of Rick. Ray brings him up at the start of his book when he talks about all the people he lost. And there's that really sad video after he dies where Kurt Hennig says like it's a wake up call for a lot of people in the business, and it's just very, very sad.
Brett
hard
and
not to kind of think about that crew, yeah.
The DVD project that he came back for in 2005.
Yeah.
Like there's the documentary and the matches, and there's also like this like little just vignette that he wanted included in it where he wanted to mention like all of the people that were important to him. And you know, this wasn't too far removed from Brett's stroke, but he gets really emotional talking about Rick Rude. And you know, I mean, those WCW contracts were obviously big, and Bischoff was taking anybody at that point in time. But that's still like man-to-man shit like that, like quitting your job, like in allegiance to someone else. That's a big thing.
It was also a big deal because like Rude and Bischoff wasn't on good terms. He just called Eric up and was like, "I'm coming in." And Eric was like, "You're doing what?" And he's like, "I'll be on Nitro." I'll see. Like he didn't. Rick had no interest in negotiating with Eric. He just explained he'd be there. Here's the photo that Alex was referencing, which is. By the way, look at Big Leon's face. This is
me
incredible.
and Joe in Las Vegas in about 5 months.
It's like this is the best photo to show if you want to convince someone about Rude's reputation as a legitimate tough guy. Because looking at this, I have no doubt he could kick the shit out of Vader. Looking at these two gentlemen, like no way I'm doubting it, dude. No way. Incredible look, But yeah, I have to say, I think Rude's WCW run is. I find it very difficult to watch a lot of it because he visually is like deteriorating in front of our eyes. Like he looks so rough by the end of that run. Of course, he's passed in April '99. He does do like one thing with physicality in WCW. I forget who it's against. He does like a clothesline, I want to say.
There's in WCW in the suit as the manager. I think it's the last thing he did, which is so funny. He takes an atomic drop and sells it like Rick Rude does.
There you go.
Yeah.
He the story goes that he wanted to wrestle and Bischoff would not pay the Lloyd's of London deal. Which like look, whatever you think of, I mean, unfortunately the last thing that Eric needed at that time was another guy from, Golden Age WWF, so I get it. It was probably not really the expenditure they needed. It made Rude very, very mad, and that's why when Rude passed, Bischoff attended his funeral and was like told to leave by the family because Rude like hated him by that point. Which, for all of his faults, you can tell when Eric Bischoff talks about that's like a pretty rough memory because I think he fought a lot of Rick. It just didn't work out. Before he died, Rick was training to do like a shoot fight. He was training to be like an MMA fighter. So, I mean, an awful idea at that point in his life. But that was what he's intended to do. He was desperate to do something. So.
He's only 40 years old, man.
Yeah, it's brutal. He would be one of the young top guys currently. So, wow. It's a very, very sad deal. But that schedule, man, like we often glorify and romanticize the house shows, man. That it was, look, him and Hennig are such great examples. They were two guys who worked hard and took their job seriously and bumped hard. And look at what it did to their bodies, man. Jesus. Rick eventually would go in the Hall of Fame. Was it 2016?
17. It was at 33. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. So this is notable because his son, also Rick Rude, right, is delivered like a very famous speech. Do you guys remember this? Oh, he does his son does the like, if I could, he does the, all you sweat holes can shut your mouth for a moment, that whole deal.
Yeah.
And the place fucking pops huge.
If I remember correctly, too, he was a big fella. He was a tall boy. Yeah.
I think he's like a bodybuilder. Yeah, he definitely had some, and he had the voice too. The voice was like exactly like his dad's voice. But that's a moment that always comes to mind because I think that says so much about how iconic a character he was. That like his son did that in front of a Hall of Fame crowd. Which, let's be real, we've all experienced it. Those Hall of Fame crowds are not always exactly clued in on who these gentlemen are that are getting inducted. I've experienced that firsthand. As soon as he went to that promo, bro, they knew it immediately and popped, which is great. But before we get to any kind of closing thoughts, let's give any other call-outs of matches. Steamboat Iron Man came up. Wrestle War 92 goes without saying. Any others we'd like to shout out from the last act of Rick Rude's in-ring career?
That's the period of time where he has, like, if you watch just, put Saturday Nights on in the background, like that's the era he has the most fun squash matches because to Joe's point about his arrival there, he he's going to be a fucking marauder now. He's not going to be Rick Rude dancing around in the ring and shit. So there's a lot of jobbers he just beats the shit out of. I mean, there's that one famous clip that goes viral every once in a while, the guy who tested him and he just fucking mollywopped him in the ring.
Yeah.
But there's a 6-man with like him and Vader and Sid, maybe?
Yes. Him, Vader, and Sid versus Davey, Sting, and maybe Dustin.
Yeah, that's fun.
Clash. Yeah.
I think it's the same clash as the Horsemen against the Blondes. But yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
Did him and Muda ever have any really good matches? They would have had to have wrestled.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one. I like the Thunder Cage 6-man from Super Brawl 4.
Yep.
It's fun. Any others, Oracle? Come to mind?
I'm probably a little bit higher. Again, it's an okay to good match, but I'm probably a little bit higher than you on the Dustin 30-minute.
Yeah,
but it's not the Steamboat.
Right. It is decent though. Yeah.
But the Dustin 30-minute is good. I think it is worth watching. The Pillman match that I brought up is great.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great
From
match.
92 TV. That match is excellent. I don't remember the date on it, but it is great. I think it might be April 92, maybe.
Maybe.
There's all these Dangerous Alliance tags and this is not the last of Rick Rude that we'll see in 2024 for Grin Grappler. I'm just gonna say it right now.
Just gonna put that out there.
There's an elimination tag where it's him and Vader versus Flair and Sting.
Oh yes, MS Rules 2 from Clash, right?
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So like as you get deeper in Rude's run, a lot of it becomes the tag and multi-man stuff where you can pick his spots, but there is still some fun stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some, and obviously as Oracle has alluded to, there's a lot of Dangerous Alliance stuff which we'll maybe discuss on another time soon.
Mm-hmm.
Let's kind of close up then with final thoughts, the legacy of Rick Rude. Anything else you'd like to add, Alex? But before we do that, I feel you have some physical media and such to discuss. Yes.
Video games, because I always knew of the WCW Super Brawl for Super Nintendo game. I never realized that Rick Rude was on it, but that makes sense now considering he was in the Super Nintendo Top 10 tournament. He was also in the first and I believe only WCW game that was released on the Game Boy from 1994 called WCW Wrestling The Main Event. The roster consisted of Big Van Vader, Dustin Rhodes, Johnny B. Bad, Rick Rude, Rick and Scott Steiner, Ron Simmons, Sting, and this is a new one to me, his video game debut, Steve Austin. The first game he was ever in was a WCW game on Game Boy. As Bob mentioned, we had the Showdown Legends of Wrestling. Rick Rude was in Revenge on Nintendo 64, but he wasn't a playable character. Him and Dusty Rhodes and like Elizabeth and a few other people would walk out. They had models, but they would just be your manager. Like they would walk out with you to the ring if you were, in the NWO or something. 08 was his first appearance in a WWE game as a legend, and then in 09, one of Bob's favorites, the Legends of WrestleMania game, he was in that as well.
He was.
And since then, he's made sporadic appearances in the 2K franchise because, like you said, his legend deal seems a bit wibbly wobbly. Come 2007, in the all-time great Jakks Classic Superstars line, is when he finally got his third figure. With the cloth fabric goods robe, he came with the IC title. There were two versions of him in that.
Alex, I've got you some visual aids here, bro. We can go through the timeline here, brother. Let's go for it. Let's do it.
Dude, that third one in this, the Unmatched Fury, they were basically models, but they were so detailed. They were fucking awesome. I have a Sabu one that is just incredible. The 2010s Legends, those are pretty rare now. He had his I never knew they made a SummerSlam cage set that came with him and Warrior in their gear from 90. That is fantastic. And since then, he's a very flashy wrestler. You can make figures of this guy all day long. Got a pop vinyl.
The Build-A-Figure, Alex, there it is.
You get a pop vinyl, it's pretty and then the Superstar series, those ones that look like the Remcos from back in the day. I've started collecting those. I haven't been able to find the Rick Rude one yet, but His most recent one, I think we even had a back and forth in the DMs about this, Joe. He has a new Legends figure that has a chase where he comes with the big gold. The 92 version of Rick Rude.
This is a tough predicament, Alex, because I mean, this is a great figure. Don't be wrong, but the chase being here we go. This is, I mean, I'm gonna have to make this happen. I feel I'm gonna have to figure this out. You know, I'm gonna have to. It is what it is, brother.
So one more time, perhaps, and this is you and Oracle have explained this to me like a child 4 times now. When is the separation from when that big gold belt is no longer the NWA title and becomes the WCW title?
Fitting you bring it up because I'd forgotten to say it. It's him. He's the guy because
Sting beats him.
Oh Jesus, he's the reason NWA didn't want him to be the world champion, right? Remember that was the big controversy. I don't know why. I've never got any insight on this. If anyone knows, tell me. So
the big gold for the moment, because like there's that Barry Windham Great Muta match that like it's for the big gold was the NWA title, and the WCW title was that one that Vader wore, the small one, or he didn't wear it, slung across his shoulder. And okay, so this all right,
yeah.
And then to clear it up,
come on.
Eventually, Sting wins it from Rude's injury or whatever, and then. Well, Sting becomes international champion from Rude's injury, and then Sting and Flair have the Clash of the Champions vacation. And if I'm not mistaken, Joe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the big gold is the lineage from there.
Yeah, yes, it is, and that's the match where Sherry shows up and they flip.
Yeah, that was in Charleston, South Carolina, and my brother Dylan was at that show live.
So this is the deal. So Flair wins the belt from Wyndham, and it's still the NWA strap. The NWA, what was left of the NWA, I should say. Objected to Rick Rude beating Ric Flair, and WCW just did it because, in honesty, I mean, at this point, the NWA is not, it's not really a thing. Now, I have no idea why they did that or like what the situation was with that. I'd really like to know, but that's I'm glad you brought it up, Alex. I'd forgotten that's like a part of his,
So is that when the NWA title goes vacant until Shane Douglas wins the tournament?
Yeah.
My God.
Yep. And it goes back to the old belt, right? Which still is the belt, hilariously. Yes, wild times.
So Rick Rude helped jumpstart ECW in a way. That's
exactly.
Put those pieces together.
In a couple ways, really, with what he did for Paul Lee, I guess, right? So, like, that was a big deal for Paul Lee. He endorsed Paul Lee by letting him be his manager, right? So we can craft something really special with this. At least we can put some time into it.
I did forget to mention that too. World of Wrestling Wow, the magazine from the late 90s. I do remember when Rick Rude died, they had a piece on them, and Tommy Dreamer wrote in and wrote about how disgusting Rick Rude found him. Like he was talking about like he would just watch him eat and be disgusted by him, and like it was really funny. Like it was real tongue in cheek, but he talked about like his eating habits on the road, and like Rick Rude would hate having to ride around with him because he'd get $13 worth of McDonald's, which of course back in the late 90s that's like infinite food, and he would just eat it all on the road, and Rick Rude would be disgusted by him. I think it was like Rick Rude found me disgusting was how he started or something like that.
That's awesome. All right, there's the other Rhodes story that Austin always liked telling. Do you guys remember this one where Austin kept saying "God damn" and Rick pulled the car over in rage?
Wasn't like the punchline he said, "Do you have to take the Lord's name in fucking vain over and over
again?"
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah, dude, that's awesome. Tremendous.
God damn, son, I want my frame board gimmick.
Steve, every other sentence, Steve says, "God damn."
Jesus Christ. Dude, I was watching that little montage of footage the WWE Vault dropped, like just random behind the scenes stuff from Survivor Series. And when he's cutting those promos on Bret Hart, like he never sounded intimidating saying WWE, but the WWF, the way he would just say it.
We should also, Grant's right, I've tweeted it a million times, the famous Simply Ravishing theme, which is an all-timer. I've read somewhere that he fucking hated it, which makes it even funnier because it pops me huge. A classic piece of business. Tremendous stuff. And also, while we're on these tales of the road and such, Kevin Nash talks often about how much he learned from Rick Rude. And I mean, we shouldn't laugh, but it is what it is. He asked famously when Kevin was very new in the business, Rick had a very simple question for him, which was, can you roll a joint? And Kevin, you imagine how Kevin tells this story, right? I mean, he's explaining, of course he can, right?
We were in Manny driving through.
And again, it was a different time. The damage is done now, folks. It is what it is. The way they would operate on the road would be that Rick would take his pills, and Kev's job was to roll as many joints as humanly possible in the hour before the pills kicked in. So Rude would drive. And like you can eat the way Kev explained, like him in shotgun, just fucking stacking joints. And then they'd switch and Rude would just, work his way through them. And that's, Kev loved him. And at one point, Kevin even said, like, I won't go in the Hall of Fame until Rude's in. I don't think that's how it eventually worked out, but nonetheless, either way. And also, one last Kevin Nash story. I saw a video where Rude's son was talking about the Hall of Fame and his experience, and he said that Kev was like walking alongside him, and Kev just like leaned in and whispered, I could tell you some stories about your old man, and then just walked off. Fucking awesome. So anyway, let's put a bow on it. Here we go, folks. Final thoughts. Anything else in the legacy of Ravishing Rick Rude? Bobby, take us home, brother. You go first.
No, this was a hell of a time. We talked about at the beginning, we only did like a 6-year span here, and here we are 30 years later, still reminiscing fondly, and I think that's a lot of his legacy right there. And it's going to continue to kind of grow and be that, and it's good, man.
Very much so. Wild to hear 30 years removed from his in-ring career. This still feels topical and relevant, and like something people care about. Says a lot, I think. Quite the legacy. Oracle, anything else you'd like to add, mate, before we look ahead?
No, it's just he's somebody who, we kind of brought up earlier, doesn't get talked about enough as really kind of an all-time great in terms of just like overall as a pro wrestler.
Yeah.
Just tremendous. And showed that he could do like everything, whether it was, as a tag wrestler, singles in the ring, character, promo, look, everything. Just tremendous all around pro wrestler. And really didn't even have like, granted, 10 years was a long run back then, but still,
sure.
84 to 94, which was kind of his significance there. That's not that long in the grand scheme of things. And he really had a kind of huge run in both the big two. And things like him having good wrestling matches, not like sports entertainment matches, but good wrestling matches with Ultimate Warrior and shit is like something that doesn't, that isn't talked out, talked about enough or thought about enough, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Just a really gifted pro wrestler would kind of be the best description. And again, a guy who is kind of only looked at in the peripheral, when it comes to WWE history and should be talked about a lot more.
To your point too about the time frame, it's like you also can kind of trim either ends of that, right? Because of what we mentioned, like Rude slows down and then it takes him what? So like,
yeah, it's really in a lot of ways like 88 to 92, really. You know what I mean? Like it's
for sure. Because I mean, the guy we see in our first act is not who we see in even the second act. It's just wild. It's interesting because you don't actually. The reason I know it was hilarious the way I brought it up earlier when we were talking about this being one of the shorter time frames, but the reason I thought it was relevant is I wouldn't have necessarily guessed it, but that's the way it is. Very interesting. Alex, any closing thoughts, mate?
We've touched on a lot of it, but I think mostly for the purposes of Grin Grappler, he's a perfect wrestler. To talk about, there's lore, there's matches you don't know if they exist, like we talked about. There's these like matches that sound insane that we can just kind of fantasize about, and then the body that we do have access to is pretty damn impressive too. Man. I mean, I'm not gonna say like he was Savage or Hogan, but he was definitely a huge player of that era. Had I guess what I'll say like is most complimentary towards him is within like a sustained 5 periods had like substantially different presentations of character while keeping like the same identity. And it was completely believable both in the moment and in hindsight. You know, he didn't like it wasn't Billy Graham trying to do like karate and shit. It was just like, all right, well, he's still like this womanizer that's full of himself, but he's gonna beat the fuck out of you. And it's like, yeah, I believe he can do that. So yeah, hell of a performer, obviously, and I'm kind of glad this. You know, when we talked about the Von Erichs about a year ago, can't help but kind of get tragic and kind of sad in that. And I think Rick Rude is a tragic story. Again, he was fucking 40. I'm a few trips around the sun away from that, so thinking about that's insane. And his wrestling career was so short. Man, think about like by modern standards. Think about how long like Kenny Omega's been wrestling. That's like 2.5 times the amount of time Rick Rude wrestled. And I hope some people learn from him. You know, it took his generation a little while to catch up to it, but a tragic tale, but a hell of a career and a wrestler that you can comfortably talk about and analyze for a while without it getting like repetitive.
For sure. I think, you know, one of the all-time great wrestling villains, right? The fact that we're like fascinated by this potential babyface run, and I'm fascinated by this potential babyface match with Honky Tonk Man, says a lot about how much of a heel he was. Like, I don't even know what that looks like, dude. That intrigues me. That says a ton. I will always remember him for that 92. That's crazy. Matt said I was in year 25. That's incredible from Ben. My goodness. I'll always remember him for that 92 peak. His look, his presence, his work, his promo, his selling, all of the above. That's what I think of when I think of Rick Rude. But what an iconic character. And I love your point, Alex, about how he did reinvent himself, just not in a way that was like dramatic or whatever. It was just, he was different in WCW. And there are definitely elements of what if, but I think the fact that in that short time he left such a mark says an awful lot. So one of my personal favorites, I'm thrilled to have covered him here on the Grappler, and this was a hell of a time, fellas. Very, very fun. Now, usually at this point in the program, we would look ahead and maybe come up with some names, and Bob would pick between them, and then would be, you know, at Bob's order, of course. Here's a little bit different. We're not going to be doing that for the next 2 months, boys, because our schedule is locked in.
Mm-hmm.
Our holiday special
locked in
is going to be something very unique that came together a few months ago. We mentioned it on one of the shows when he came up. For the first time ever, we're going to take a look at a manager on Grin Grappler. As Paul E. Dangerously, who I'm told is doing things of relevance now, I've heard. We're going to look at his career through the Grin Grappler format. So we're going to look at like the matches of his guys in that where like it will tell the story of his career that way.
And I'm just going to say right now,
please do.
Wrestle War 1992.
Yeah, it has to be.
Will be watched.
Yeah, it has to be. I think
War Games 92 will be watched. It will be a refreshing reminder. And I'm excited for this Saturday, but it'll be a refreshing reminder.
Which he's also involved in, which is absolutely hilarious. So, again, we've always done like different episodes for the holidays, and I think this is a fun one. If the format is like, you know, really clicks and people like it, we can do it with other managers, obviously. I know Bob can't wait to do the Cornet episode, but for now, this is going to be a one-off for December. And then, of course, in January, Alex, you've been in a 4-month training camp preparing, brother. It's almost time for Shane O'Mac.
Here comes the money.
And thankfully, it appears that there won't be an AEW run to make that even less appealing than it was already going to be. But yeah, that's what's ahead of us. So we do have no, selection process here. When we get to the end of the Shane episode in January, we'll, I'm sure we'll have a bunch of wrestlers to comb through. But that's what's coming up, folks, next month. Paul E. Dangerously, of the Bloodline fame and cinema and things of that nature. And then Shane O'Mac to kick off our fearless and brave 2025 as only we can. All right. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. This has been a pleasure. Let's do some plugs and get on out of here. We may beat the 3 hour mark on this. We may clock in a little live. My goodness. Look at us. Look at us. Our restraint as older workers. It's just incredible to see. The Oracle of Wrestling. Plugs and promotions, mate. Go for it.
This Friday evening, 11:05 Eastern Time. Myself, Joe, Bobby, Chris Bordine, the Fed Four are back for the Survivor Series War Games 2024 preview. Saturday, November 30th, 6 p.m. Eastern, not 4 p.m. Eastern. Joe's not going to start a stream and
never again
watch Jackie Redmond and Michael Cole talk for 2 hours. At 6 p.m. Eastern Time, Joe, possibly Brainbuster, hopefully others will join him for the Survivor Series War Games 2024 Grin Along. And then we have a huge December coming up. Lots of things planned for that month. Stay tuned, folks, for free and late night Grin Gold subscribers. All sorts of goodies.
All sorts, dude. We're starting the month and setting the tone on Sunday. December 1st, we're doing our retro pay-per-view Grin Along. So we're doing it, boom, out the gate, straight away. So, yeah, lots coming up. And also in December, we should know, in addition to the special Grappler that, we've come to do here, also we're going to do the Hanging with Holbert Holiday Special, which will be announced officially in terms of the format and such very, very soon. So much coming up in December. Bobby, anything you'd like to promote, mate?
I don't think so. Oracle got the Grin. I'll be there Sunday for whatever we're watching. And, excited for December as well. Going to be around a lot more. Was not around enough this month.
Tremendous. Bobby saw his paid and said, well, hold on. He's got on the phone to Barry Bloom. Contrarian Alex, tell us about the Contrarians. Now, of course, we've spoken about it, dude. The Ultimate Fighter project, which is coming together. We've almost got that whole thing in the can. I can't wait for people to hear it. I've had so much fun. But what's happening in addition to that as well as that itself? Go for it.
Man, we've been just with the holidays and everything recording all over the place as we do in advance. But we timely, considering the sequel's dropping this week, Moana. We had covered that, which recently came out. And if I were a betting man, I'd say Dwayne's going to have a busy week with the premiere of that, Thanksgiving, and then, maybe being in Vancouver on Saturday night. Recently recorded Star Trek The Motion Picture that'll be coming out soon, the original, which for any of y'all familiar with it is an extremely divisive film. And we'll have a Christmas episode coming up soon. We're doing a commentary track on Gremlins for anyone who enjoys that movie. But if you haven't already on your podcatchers and subscription services, the Contrarians, go ahead and subscribe as January 13th, midpoint of January, the first episode of Tough 20, our Ultimate Fighter series, is going to come out. And as Joe mentioned, we just have 2 more episodes to record. They're in the can, and it's been a hell of a journey spanning, obviously, the history of the Ultimate Fighting Championship in the first season of its groundbreaking reality show. But we've also had quite a time reliving the March to WrestleMania at the beginning of 2005 and the film, music, fashion, and trends of the time as well.
Yeah, I've had a real issue as someone who's not used to. Only recently with Hanging with Holbert have I got used to doing anything taped, and so at times I've referenced bits from our show, which of course mean nuts. Like I've consistently said the phrase "men of honor," which it means nothing to. It's a funny phrase, but it's much funnier to you and I. But nonetheless, I'm very, very excited for that to be out there, and we may be doing some stuff to, boost it up a little bit and give you guys an idea of the dynamic, because it is quite the dynamic with us two, Julio and Steve of Twitter.com fame, or X. He's now Blue Sky, is Steve. So,
famed independent wrestler, Steve.
One of the I'd say him, Cardona, and Effie are the big 3 at this point.
Big Boom AJ's in the pros now, so he's lapped Steve.
For sure, yeah. Maybe Elias would be the 4th on the Mount Rushmore currently. I don't know. But either way, an unbelievable crew, and we're going to try and do something to kind of, accompany that here on the Grin. But either way, wonderful times ahead. Please support the Contrarians. I will not be doing a show tomorrow, folks. I've been informed while on the air that the Young Guns will be doing a show. They're going to be watching Dynamite, which I'm told is a wrestling show. Samoa Joe's going to be on that, so I'm going to avoid all temptation to watch that with them, because I absolutely could get lured into it.
Classic. believe.
It actually looks like a good show, to be honest. Like,
Yeah,
it looks good. So I get why they're going to do it. And they'll be on LNG Gold for all members if you want to check that out. So I will not be there because I have been doing shows for... When did I start this loop? This has been a loop from 1986 to BF Oracle. This has been outrageous here. We've done a hell of a lot of shows. I'm excited to not do any tomorrow. I really, really appreciate support, as we all do. But, you got to get home, man. I got to unwind after this. So making towns like this, it's a hellacious rate. But such is the LNG schedule. We wouldn't have it any other way. Become a gold member now to see shows such as WCW Lives, as Matt and I just book 2001 WCW, including a Masahiro Misawa Chris Canyon match in Las Vegas, in which I made a Fedor comparison. Proud of that one.
Hell yeah.
Watch shows such as Fave Fight Friday, where I review 7 matches a week. There's the whole house show. There's the School of Wrestling. There's Grindication. There's so much going on. All your favorite grinners. You see everyone over there. Ibu stops by pretty consistently at this point. So much going on LNG Gold. Subscribe now. Become a member now. To get involved. All right. This has been Grin Grappler, Ravishing Rick Rude. Keep grinning. All how. And enjoy this outro, folks. Goodbye.